And we're live. Welcome, everyone, to Great Empire of the Dawn, Origins of the Dothraki. Yes, we're going to talk about the Dothraki. We're going to talk about Karth. We're going to talk about Sarnor. We're going to talk about the Jogos, Nhai. Basically, what this is going to be is a very fun exploration into George's world building. It's not going to be, it's not leading up to some grand conclusion about House Dane in the last hero. It's really just a fun exploration into sort of the surprisingly deep world building that George is doing. Let me just pull up the script here. I am working off of a script. I did this live stream about 2 years ago called Flight of the Bones with Aziz from History of Westeros, of course. And it's basically a reformatting of an old essay that I did way back in my first batch of essays. Back in the Westeros.org days, if you will. And essentially what I did is recently, just this past week, is I went back to it and I trimmed a lot of the fat out because it did have a lot of fat in there. So I trimmed it down and basically got it refocused based on the Great Empire of the Dawn train of thought that we've had going in the past few videos. So it is some old and some new information, but that Flight of the Bones live stream ended up being 3 hours. It was not what you would call focused and concise. And so what I'm trying to bring to you today is something nice and compact and also fun to debate. So definitely taking super chats and questions, interjections on this one. I do have a script, but it's, like I said, it's pretty fun, loose topic here. I got my friend Quinn hanging out, working on the computer next to me. So, hi, Quinn. And we are, just keeping it loose. It's Sunday. We're chilling. It's Starry Wisdom Sunday, if you will. We have a tradition going back several years of broadcasting on Sunday at 3 Eastern. It is the Starry Wisdom Sunday hour. So, hello, Pat Riley and Kraken Tacos, Barrel Rider, Carl Carsnark, Nicola, all the friendlies filing in. And let me just go ahead and I need to get my pop-out chat happening so I don't miss anybody who's tagging me. The StreamYard chat does not give you the tags. So got to have 2 chats going. Kinda, sorta. How's everyone feeling today? It's the weekend. Oh, Quinn, everyone says hi, by the way. And congratulations. Because Tadia is conquering the world. She's not even born yet. She's gestating in the womb and still conquering the world. Thank you, everyone who's supported Quinn's Tadia, which you can find on Indiegogo. Pretty much just put in Tadia, T-A-D-H-Y-A, and you will find it. She's everywhere now. She's taken over the internet. Maud Mary says, can we talk about ghost grass? Sure, Maud Mary. I can fit in the ghost grass. Absolutely. I don't know if that was in the script. I think it was. I can't remember. I've messed with it a couple times, but I'll get it in. It should be in there if it's not. Thank you, Maud Mary. That was, and Maud Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you win a copy of Tadia on Tony Teflon? Yes, you did. So congratulations. Couldn't have happened to a better Maud Mary. All right. So yes, we're going to church. Thanks everyone for joining me. We've got over 100 people here already, just filing in. So hit the like button on your way in. Leave a comment on your way out. Feel free, like I said, I'm working off a script today, but feel free to jump in with questions or comments at any time. Can you warg a dire Zorse? I think you can warg literally any animal. The dragon's going to have to be the hardest animal to warg, and I think we're going to possibly see that too. So, so yes, you can. I do believe those people out there on the Lonely Light are warging seals and stuff, as is implied. So yeah. And I also wonder if some of the human-animal hybrid stuff, of course, we did the Dracomorph theory, but one of the other ways that you could start having, deep one human hybrids or human-animal hybrids is through skin-changing magic. Yeah, it's pretty terrible stuff. So in any case, can a dire Zorse warg a human? Well, if dire Zorses became fully conscious and self-aware, maybe. But that's an alternate evolution. So let's go ahead and rip into this. Like I said, we are here to talk about the Dothraki, the Sarnori, the Jogos, Nhai, and the Kartheen as descendants of the great Empire of the Dawn. And yes, thank you for everyone. Thank you and welcome to everyone who's been hanging out on Discord. It is basically, it seems to be just a place to hang out and talk symbolism and myth and stuff. I don't run it, but my friend Pat Riley is modding over there. So disclaimer, I take no responsibility for what anyone says. That's not me. But it seems like it's a nice, friendly place to talk right now. So check it out. That's the Lucifer Means Lightbringer Slack. And Pat Riley, feel free to drop the link in there. So yeah. All right. So today, like I said, we're going to take a new angle on providing evidence for the Great Empire of the Dawn, not only as the builders of Ashai, not only as the ancestors of Valeria and House Dane, but as the people who essentially shaped the modern world of Planetos, or Girth, GRRTH, or whatever you want to call it. They seem to be the starting point for all knowable history, and their fingerprints can be found in nearly every corner of the modern world. It should be understood that any empire as massive as the Great Empire of the Dawn would have had to have been a multi-ethnic conglomerate state. And we see that in the wake of their collapse, several different nation states popped up within their official borders with varying ethnicity, from the people of Hyrkoon to Yiti, the people of Nefer, the nomadic Jogos Nhai, the island nation of Lang, and of course the ancient Ashai. All of these people were within the borders of the Great Empire of the Dawn. So yes, you really can't have a nation that big that's just like one ethnicity, really. I guess the closest thing would perhaps be some of the Chinese empires, but even then they were absorbing, different different peoples and stuff like that. So probably shouldn't speak too far outside of my expertise of history, but nevertheless, the Great Empire of the Dawn, definitely going to be a multi-ethnic state. It's logical, and it's basically confirmed. So that's how we have to look at it. Catherine Miller getting the super chat started. Thank you. Thanks for giving me something to do between guests today. Looking forward to the rest of the stream. Oh, yes. I'm all about giving you guys something to do. I've been, basically, I was deprived of internet for the first half of the month, and so now I'm streaming as much as I possibly can. I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit here so you can see more of my cool shirt. Hang on a second. There we go. See, I've got 3 aces and a king. King. That's what I got. Because there's only one you. Anyways, today we're going beyond the peoples of the East. And we're going to go beyond the few dark sorcerers left huddling in the greasy black stone buildings of Ashai. We aren't going to talk about the Danes, who are definitely, positively 100% descended from the Great Empire of the Dawn. And of course, we talked about them in Great Empire of the Dawn, Westeros. So check that video out. We aren't going to discuss Valeria as descendants of the Great Empire of the Dawn because we explored that relationship pretty thoroughly in Great Empire of the Dawn, Dracomorph. Suffice it to say that Valeria seems to owe a very large part of their magical legacy to the Great Empire of the Dawn, and they are geographically close enough to the Jade Sea for us to see that the Valerian Peninsula might be an obvious place to flee the wrath of the Bloodstone Emperor and the Long Night Chaos. We are going to talk about Karth, however, which is a place a lot of people ask me about in relation to the Great Empire of the Dawn. We're also going to discuss the evidence that suggests that the Sarnori and the Dothraki, two horse-loving people, very tall genetics and very similar skin tones and hair color, who inhabited the same grasslands at different but overlapping eras. They might also be descended from the Great Empire of the Dawn. This will also lead us back to the discussion of the Jogos Nhai, the Zorse Lords, who we know are children of the fallen Great Empire because there's actually some thinly disguised and fairly compelling cultural parallels between the Dothraki and the Jogos Nhai, as you'll see. So like I said, there's nothing super monumental at the end of this search. So don't expect me to try to sell you on the idea that you need to understand the Dothraki or Sarnori are related to the Great Empire of the Dawn in order to understand the conclusion of A Song of Ice and Fire. This is really just a fun exploration into the sneakily extensive world building that Martin has snuck into the margins of the 5 books and, of course, into our good old friend, the World of Ice and Fire, which we do love. I love the World of Ice and Fire. Oh, yes. Now, Old Gis seems to be one of the cultures that definitely does not seem to have much to do with the Great Empire of the Dawn, at least not that I can find. And yeah, but there's also the question of Garth the Green and the Faith of the Seven. definitely has some similarities. But today we're talking horse lords. So before we get to that, I want to talk about Karth. The Karth section is going to be nice and short. So I think the evidence is pretty good that there is some kind of cultural link between the Great Empire of the Dawn and Karth. Karth claims to be, quote, ancient beyond the memory of man and the greatest city that ever was, although it's hard to know exactly how true that is, of course. What we can say is that the older that Karth is, the more likely it is to be connected to the Great Empire of the Dawn, because it's actually sitting right on the doorstep of the stated borders of the Great Empire, right where the southern tip of the Bones Mountains meets the Jade Sea. It's notable that the Karthine are described as tall and milk pale. Of course, the Valerians have very pale skin as well, so it's possible that these fair looks come from the same branch of the Great Empire of the Dawn lineage as Valeria. The cultural links are more clear, however, and it may be that the Karthine inherited some of the magical knowledge of the Great Empire of the Dawn more than anything else. So the thing that turned me on to this idea, guys, is the sort of false and glorious vision of the undying of Karth that Dany sees in A Clash of Kings, right before she sees the actual undying, who are, of course, those decrepit-looking blue husks. So the glorious vision that they sort of project to her seems to me like the undying are trying to represent their best idea of what the Great Empire of the Dawn people look like, what the ancient Ashai people look like. They're trying to, they want to entice Dany, and they're trying to pose as her ancestors in some sense. And so take a look at this description. Beyond the doors was a great hall and a splendor of wizards. Some wore sumptuous robes of ermine, ruby velvet, and cloth of gold. I think that's ermine, too. Another one of those words I don't know how to say because you only ever read it. Ermine or ermine? You gotta vote, Quinn? You know how to say that one?
Huh?
Do you know how to say ermine? Like the fabric? Is it ermine or ermine?
I don't know.
It's some sort of little marmots or something that they turn into. Anyways, they made fur out of all kinds of teeny little animals back in the day. And yes, Maud Mary with the very helpful super chat. She reminds you that if you use the PayPal.me link, I get all of the money instead of most of the money. And of course, we don't begrudge YouTube for taking a cut for the super chat function because it is very cool. But especially if you want to make a larger donation, like someone who sent me $100 this morning. Thank you. I won't say your name because you don't have a nickname, and I never know if people want their names public. But thank you very much. And yes, if you want to support the program, that is the best way to go directly to me. Super chat's also welcome. You can sign up for Patreon. All that stuff helps me keep bringing the material to you. So thank you, Maud Mary. And there's the link right there. So let me go ahead with this quote. We've got beyond the doors, a great hall and a splendor of wizards. Some wore sumptuous robes of, let's see if, ermine. Okay, yeah, I knew ermine. I've got disagreeing pronunciations. I'm going to go with ermine because that's what I see the majority of people saying. So beyond the doors was a great hall and a splendor of wizards. Some wore sumptuous robes of ermine, ruby velvet, and cloth of gold. It's very fancy, all of this. Others fancied elaborate armor, studded with gemstones, or tall pointed hats speckled with stars. There were women among them, dressed in gowns of surpassing loveliness. Shafts of sunlight slanted through the windows of stained glass, and the air was alive with the most beautiful music she had ever heard. A kingly man in rich robes rose when he saw her and smiled. Daenerys of House Targaryen, be welcome. Come and share the food of forever. We are the undying of Karth. Long have we awaited you, said a woman beside him, clad in rose and silver. The breast she had left bare in the Karthine fashion was as perfect as a breast could be. We knew you would come to us, the Wizard King said. 1,000 years ago we knew, and we have been waiting all this time. We sent the comet to show you the way. We have knowledge to share with you, said a warrior in shining emerald armor, and magic weapons to arm you with. You have passed every trial. Now come and sit with us, and all your questions shall be answered.
It's like if George R. R. Martin was like basic fantasy, that's how it would have went. Right? That's what I'm not going to do.
That's actually a really good call. That's a totally good call. It's like the Undying are stand-ins for your basic bitch fantasy author there. Like, oh yes, Splendor of Wizards. So like I said, they're not trying to pose, they're not trying to pass themselves off as the Great Empire of the Dawn. They are saying we're the Undying of Karth. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to have credibility with Dany. They're trying to pose as people who know who could have sent the comet. They offer to teach her the speech of dragonkind. So basically, this vision of impossible loveliness and splendor, these wizards, kings, and queens, it's meant to resonate with Dany, who's lost her home and is searching for her identity and any connections to her lineage and history. These star-speckled and gemstone-studded fine folk look nothing like Valyrians. And since this entire thing is an illusion, one imagines the Undying could have portrayed themselves as Valyrians if they wanted to. Instead, they went for something different. And to me, the only logical answer is that they were showing Dany something of their sort of idealized memory of what the Great Empire of the Dawn people might look like. They know the speech of dragonkind, like I said. They see Dany as a fulfillment of ancient prophecy, and they sent the comet. So this is all of the Azor Ahai sort of Dragon Lord stuff right here. But again, they aren't posing as Valyrians. And by giving us the words kingly and gemstones, it really makes you think like George is prodding you to think of the kingly ghosts with gemstone eyes that Dany saw only one book earlier, the ones who wanted Dany to wake the dragon. So here the air is alive with music, and the last line of A Game of Thrones after Dany wakes the dragons is, of course, and for the first time in hundreds of years, the night came alive with the music of dragons. So Qarth itself, to me, seems like George's first attempt at showing us the legacy of the ancient Ashai and the Great Empire of the Dawn. Qarth claims to be the oldest city in the world, and though Ashai is probably older, Qarth is built right on the edge of the former territory of the Great Empire and would have commanded enormous strategic importance sitting astride the Jade Gates, just from a trade perspective. Just, as they do now, it would have been true then. So they've even got a Tourmaline Brotherhood in Qarth, which I always like to joke is a sect of devotees to the wisdom of the Tourmaline Emperor. I mean, that's actually not really a joke. That could be what it is. Where else would the Tourmaline Brotherhood come from? If the Tourmaline Emperor, or if those gemstones represent entire houses, then yeah, that's the kind of name that would carry power, would resonate in that area. They're in the Far East, like I said. So the Tourmaline Brotherhood, yeah, if you were to go in there, look at their old books, they probably do talk about the Tourmaline Emperor. That's probably their dude. They probably have a poster of him like up on the wall. That's my headcanon. Anyways, it's come to my attention that somewhere in the world, it's 422, Quinn. Somewhere in the world. Perfect. Okay, so now let's get to the Dothraki. Actually, let's check on the chat. How's the chat doing? Oh, it's full of Garth emojis. That's excellent. And guys, let me just take this moment, since it is 420, and since I often do celebrate cannabis on my live stream, I want to take a moment to say that Black Lives Matter. And specifically, I want to say something. Like I said, I celebrate the open use of cannabis. I live in California. It's a legal state. So YouTube, back off, son. I never do anything illegal on my channel. I never encourage illegal activity. Only legal activity. But the fact is, I have been using cannabis a lot longer than it has been legal. Okay? And so growing up in Virginia, which is a heavily policed state, I enjoyed the benefit of the fact that if my skin were a little darker, if my ancestors came from a different part of the world, I would be as much as 8 times more likely to be arrested as a dumb 19-year-old, like buying an eighth from somebody. Okay? So this is a real thing. Like what we're seeing right now, this movement is real. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm very political on Twitter, not usually on the YouTube channel, but I do want to take a minute to make sure everyone knows very clearly where I stand, where this entire channel and podcast is about. We're all about the pursuit of truth, the transformational power of myth. That transformational power is a personal transformation, has very much, I think, to do with justice in the world. So I've always been someone who has been active politically, and specifically when it comes to the police, when it comes to authoritarianism. This is something that I don't know what to say other than what we're seeing right now is authoritarianism. It is fascism. When you see, basically, let's put it this way. Once the police decide to stop being nice to you, there's nothing you can do. You're at their mercy. I've been pulled over at least 10 times in my life. I have a problem with speeding. Like I said, when I was a teenager, I would hang out and do dumb stuff. And I've encountered the police at least 10 times. I've never feared for my life, guys. Never had a gun pulled on me. That's never happened to me. And that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm white. I mean, that just is the case. So solidarity, guys, support people, support the people that are out there in the streets calling for justice. If you can't get out there and march, look for a way that you can help. And if what I'm saying to you sounds strange and awful, then I would just ask you to think a little bit harder and listen a little bit harder, because what's going on right now is one of the most important social justice movements that we've seen in our history. And so just want to take a minute and express my complete unequivocal support for Black Lives Matter movement, for the reform of the police, for the rollback of authoritarianism, and for people standing up for all that kind of stuff. So I won't belabor the point, but there you go. That's a little bit of what you'll find on my Twitter feed. So there you go. Woo! Now let's talk about the Dothraki.
Down with the police.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that? Is that burning tires I smell? And I don't think I'm throwing anybody off here. Yeah, people are telling me to stop speeding. I do need to stop speeding, and I have. But yeah, no, you guys, you know, I think most people are on the same page here with all this kind of stuff. I don't think, yeah. So you know, I don't think I'm throwing anybody off to here, but important to say something. So the Dothraki, guys, when you read the story of the Great Empire of the Dawn in the World of Ice and Fire, you see that right after Azor Ahai and Lightbringer defeated the forces of darkness and returned love and light to the world, or something like that, the diaspora mega bomb, that is the Great Empire of the Dawn's dissolution, is spelled out. So here's the really important quote. Yet the Great Empire of the Dawn was not reborn, for the restored world was a broken place, where every tribe of men went its own way, fearful of all the others, and war and lust and murder endured, even to our present day, or so the men and women of the further east believe. So an empire larger than any seen since, about the same size as the Empire of Valyria, you could say. It's the one that built Nhai, a city larger than any city that we've seen since, was broken apart in terror, madness, and anarchy during the Long Night. And of course, in our timeline live stream from this last week, we talked about the Long Night bottleneck and the effect it would have, breaking apart civilization. All established, you know, authorities of power are going to be ended. War, chaos, most people die. So that's what we're talking about here. And that's what this quote is basically implying. So the wording here is another clue that the Great Empire of the Dawn was a multi-ethnic state, one which contained many, quote, tribes of man that then went their separate way. So this spreading out in all directions from the Great Empire of the Dawn probably began as soon as the horrific reign of the Bloodstone Emperor did. So when the daughter of the Opal Emperor succeeded him as the Amethyst Empress, Amethyst Empress, that's always a weird one to say. Her envious younger brother cast her down and slew her, proclaiming himself the Bloodstone Emperor and beginning a reign of terror. He practiced dark arts, torture, and necromancy. He enslaved his people, took a tiger woman for his bride, feasted on human flesh, and cast down the true gods to worship a black stone that had fallen from the sky. Moon meteors. In the annals of the Further East, it was the blood betrayal, as his usurpation was named, that ushered in the Age of Darkness, called the Long Night. So, this sounds pretty bad, right? Sounds like the kind of thing that might make you want to migrate a bit, or even a lot. I have to say, as much as I like moon meteors, if the President of the United States ever started, quote, worshipping a black stone that fell from the sky, I'd have a few concerns, maybe even more concerns than I do now. I mean, if you're looking for something like an unbelievable Trump story, like Trump worships black meteor, that's pretty much where you'd have to go to find something that's like obviously satire. But in any case, if the president was also practicing cannibalism and necromancy, then it would indeed be time to, quote, move to Canada, which is, by the way, if you're not from the US, that's what people in the United States on both the right and the left say when the wrong president is elected. Oh, I got to move to Canada, you know. So in any case, think about this. If you've been one of the millions of people living under the yoke of the Great Empire of the Dawn, you know, and the Bloodstone Emperor, people might start saying things like, you know, I've heard the weather in the summer sea is lovely this time of year, or even Sartorius can't be that bad, can it? So, so in fact, the Rhoynar fleeing the Valyrians is probably a good parallel for this. If the wrath of the Bloodstone Emperor, a presumed dragon lord, turned on your particular tribe of men, as the wrath of evil tyrants always does sooner or later. You'd basically do anything and go anywhere, even Sothorios, to get away, which is what the Rhoynar did. So it turns out that people didn't actually have to go to Sothorios to get away, although maybe some did. Those brindled men have to come from somewhere, after all. No, as it turns out, George has actually told us exactly where a great many of the enslaved people of the Great Empire of the Dawn fled to. They fled across the Bones Mountains. And I will actually pull up a picture of the Bones Mountains. I wanted to pull up a map from the lands of ice and fire. Spell the lands of. Okay. Arch. There we go. And I'll just add this to my backgrounds. How's everybody doing? How's everybody feeling? We enjoying this so far? Good. I'm assuming you all said yes. All right, let's see how this looks, guys. Let's see how this looks. That's not too bad. Yes, so, okay. The bones are right here. And Nhai is kind of right behind the couch cushion there. There you go. All right, that'll work. I'm going to give you a little bit of rough context for what we're talking about here. So, east beyond Vaes Dothrak and the Mother of Mountains, the grasslands give way to rolling plains and woods, and the earth beneath the traveler's feet turns hard and stony and begins to climb upward, ever upward. So again, this quote is from the World of Ice and Fire, and they're sort of taking you, the reader, east. They're moving east as they go. So we're on the grass plain. We've just talked about the Dothraki, and they're going east towards the Bone Mountains. So they said, beyond Vaes Dothrak and the Mother of Mountains, the grassland gives way to rolling plains. The earth beneath the traveler's feet turns hard and stony and begins to climb upward. The hills grow wilder and steeper, and soon enough the mountains appear in the far distance. There are great peaks seeming to float against the eastern sky, blue-gray giants so huge and jagged and menacing that even Lomas Longstrider, that dauntless wanderer, if his tales be true, lost heart at the sight of them, believing that he had at last reached the ends of the earth. The ancestors of the Dothraki and the other horse peoples of the grasslands knew better, for some remembered crossing those mountains from the lands that lay beyond. Did they come west in hopes of fairer fields and plenty, or in search of conquest, or were they fleeing before some savage foe? Their tales do not agree, so we may never know, but of their travails we may be certain, for they left their bones behind to mark their passing, the bones of men, the bones of horses, the bones of giants and camels and oxen, of every sort of beast and bird and monster, all can be found amongst these savage peaks. From them the mountains take their name, the Bones. Tallest of all the mountain ranges in the known world, from the Sunset Sea to Ashai by the Shadow, the Bones extend from the Shivering Sea to the Jade Sea, a wall of twisted rock and sharp stones stretching for more than 500 leagues from north to south and 100 leagues from east to west. Got a super chat question coming through from Mark. Do you think the Great Empire of the Dawn was already into slavery before the Long Night, and perhaps that's why the first men went to Westeros? I'd say it's maybe a 50-50 call. It is implied that there's a gradual descent of the Great Empire of the Dawn, as opposed to like the Bloodstone Emperor corrupted something that was completely pure. It's definitely implied that. And sorry, asymmetrical shirts just bug me here. So, in any case, it's quite possible. It's quite possible that things went pretty far south before the Bloodstone Emperor ever appeared on the scene. But I think it's strongly indicated that things took a definite turn for the worse when the Long Night fell and when he came to power. So, it's probably just one of those questions we will not be able to answer. So the Bones Mountains, guys, are a natural land barrier. I mean, almost comically so. But there are so many bones littered in the passes through these mountains that the entire mountain range is named after them and has been for as long as anyone can remember. So this sounds very much like a mass migration from east to west, and a desperate one at that. They brought all their animals with them, all their elderly, sick, and young, everyone. And no matter how many people died, it seems that turning back was not an option. And so their animals and their people and their children perished along the way and were simply left behind, or perhaps buried in quickly fashioned stone cairns. You think of Catelyn and Tyrion in the Mountains of the Moon on the way to the Vale. They don't even have time to bury their dead because they are so hard against it, and they've got to keep moving to survive themselves. So might have been a similar situation here. So check out this quote from the World of Ice and Fire. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I misread that. So the quote that we just read, it even poses the question. It says, were these people perhaps fleeing some savage foe? Well, yes. We know that during the reign of the Bloodstone Emperor, people going east would have had to cross the bones. And we know that in the wake of his reign, the tribes of men went their own ways and scattered. They dispersed. Among all the history we're given for the East, it's the obvious mechanism to trigger the kind of desperate mass migration that the Maesters say definitely happened, because we have all this skeletal evidence. And now, to me, this reminds me very much of the wildling migration towards the wall, which Jon observes in A Clash of Kings. So check this out. Their encampment had no plan to it, he saw. No ditches, no sharpened stakes, no neat rows of horse lines. Everywhere, crude earthen shelters and hide tents sprouted haphazardly, like a pox on the face of the earth. He spied untidy mounds of hay, smelled goats and sheep, horses and pigs, dogs in great profusion. Tendrils of dark smoke rose from 1,000 cook fires. This is no army, no more than it is a town. This is a whole people come together. So the wildlings were fleeing the others here, an enemy so terrifying that they felt basically their only choice was to throw themselves against a 700-foot ice wall in a basically hopeless attack. Later, when Jon is among the free folk, he sees women and children as well as their livestock animals. So the wildlings, they fled with every man, woman, and child, horse, pig, goat, dog, etc. Everything they valued, they carried on their backs. Everything else was left behind, forgotten and abandoned. That kind of wholesale migration, the kind where you don't even stop for the sick or dying, makes sense when you're fleeing an enemy as terrifying as the others. The War of the Bloodstone Emperor. So consider this line again from the passage about all the bones in the mountains. It said, the bones of horses, the bones of giants and camels and oxen, of every sort of beast and bird and monster. That almost sounds like the animals are fleeing a natural cataclysm, right? I mean, they didn't take the monsters, and probably they didn't have a lot of pet birds. I mean, this really sounds like almost like a forest fire that drives all the animals from the wood, right? Only on like a huge scale. So we, of course, do know of just such a cataclysm. Wink, wink, snap, snap, grin, grin, nudge, nudge. Know what I mean? Say no more. So there are 3 well-established passes through the mountains. Actually, let me stop and just check on the chat. I'm not looking at the chat much right now. Sorry, I'm just plowing through my script. Looks like you guys are having a great time. We've got about 288 people. Oh, if just a few of you would share the link on social media, perhaps we could get over 300. Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you for coming, everyone. We know you do have other choices on this fine Sunday. We appreciate you choosing the Lucifer Means Lightbringer channel. It means a lot. All right, so like I said, there's 3 well-established passes through the mountains, and they're all controlled by the last remnants of the lost kingdom of Hyrkoon, which used to be part of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and which gave us Hyrkoon the hero, of course, which is one of the 5 names of Azor Ahai. In other words, these passes have probably been in use since the time of the Long Night and the Great Empire, almost assuredly. Here's the quote from the World of Ice and Fire about these passes. 1,000 roads lead into the bones, wise men say, from Karth to Qohor, but only 3 lead out. As impassable as the bones appear from afar, they are indeed hundreds of footpaths. Or there are indeed hundreds of footpaths, goat tracks, game trails, stream beds, and slopes by which travelers, traders, and adventurers may find their way into the heart of the mountains. In certain places, ancient carved steps and hidden tunnels and passages exist for those who know how to find them. Yet many of these paths are treacherous, and others are dead ends or traps for the unwary. It's a trap. Small parties, well armed and well provisioned, may make their way through the bones by myriad ways when led by a guide who knows their dangers. Armies, trading caravans, and men alone, however, are well advised to stay to the main routes, the three great mountain passes that bridge the worlds of East and West, the Steel Road, the Stone Road, and the Sand Road. The Steel Road, so named for all the battles it had seen, and the Stone Road both originate in Vaes Dothrak, the former running almost due east beneath the highest peaks, the latter curving southeast to join the old Silk Road at the ruins of Unishar, called Vaes Ginni by the Horse Lords, before beginning its climb. Far south of these, the Sand Road passes through the southern bones, sometimes called the Dry Bones, for water is scarce there, and surrounding deserts, connecting the great port of Karth with the market city Tiqui, the gateway to the east. So let me see if I can use the map behind me to sort of point some of this out. Okay, so it's probably going to be... Okay, so here is Vaes Dothrak. Pardon me while I lean forward and squint at the screen. This is Vaes Dothrak. Here's one of the roads, and it goes through the bones, and right there, that's Kaya Naya. So that's one road. This one goes south here, and this is, I believe, Bayasabad or Samriana. I forget which one. And then the third pass, if I can get out of the way there, the third route is here. That's Kaya Naya. So that must be Samriana. And it goes through here and down to Karth, which is sitting right there. So there you go. There's one route, and there's the thing I'm going to point out here is that two of these routes lead right to Vaes Dothrak, okay? And it looks like I have another super chat. Thank you, folks. Thank you. Carlos says, what if the bones belong to the Whites who died trying to cross in the long night before they built the Five Forts? Well, the Five Forts are on the other side of the Great Empire of the Dawn. However, some of the bones could be Whites. However, all the animals and stuff, like I said, this really does sound like a migration. And then the other part of it is that the ancestors of the Dothraki, they remember this migration in their legends. And it even mentions the other horse lords of the plains. So there's cousins of the Dothraki out there on the plains too. And they all remember this migration. So there you go. Oh, you can't see my mouse. Ah, shoot. I was using my mouse that whole time. And okay, so I got to do it with my finger. This is going to be even harder. All right, one more time. Vaes Dothrak, okay. One of the roads leads right. Oh, this is going to be fucking impossible. Right there. That's the first city. That's the first pass. Then the other road goes down this way. This is so impossible. It's like, yeah. Yes, help me, Quinn, help me. Worst. Okay, well, figure it out, people. Figure it out. Everyone's like, oh, I thought it was just me. Do the weatherman thing. Yeah, that weatherman thing is harder than it looks, man. Props to all the weathermen out there. Okay, all right. Well, at least it's comedy. I need a laser pointer. That's it. Well, the thing is, behind me is actually a green screen. It's not actually this map. So I guess it would still work, though. All right. This virtual reality thing's got me for a loop. But I'm glad everyone's laughing. All right. So if you can't visualize all that, like I said, the point is two of the roads that go through the bones lead us right to Vaes. Two of the roads that go through the mountains lead right to Vaes Dothrak. And the Dothraki grasslands generally, and of course the other road leads right to Karth. And so that's more evidence that the Great Empire of the Dawn refugees fleeing over these roads would have probably helped establish these places or migrated to these places if they were already established. Karth probably already existed concurrent with the Great Empire. So what I'm picturing there is essentially Great Empire of the Dawn refugees fleeing to Karth and just living there. Probably they were already, related to somewhat. Like I said, the tall, pale Karthines sound a lot like Valerians anyway. So, and they're also the only white people in the East. So it kind of makes sense that they'd be connected somehow. In any case, that southern road is the first one you'd take. If you're going Ashai, Yiti, along the south. Oh, let's wave my arms around some more. I can do this. I know I can do this. So right here, see if you're in Yiti and you're fleeing, this was the first place you'd go, is along the coast or this first road. So Karth definitely took some Great Empire of the Dawn refugees. I guess that's my point. There's no way it wouldn't have. Now, much of the traffic fleeing the Great Empire of the Dawn would have come through that south, the southern part of the Bones. Now, the other two passes, they dump you right out onto the Great Grass Sea. And the established roads from those two passes run to Vase Dothrak and the Mother of Mountains, just like we said. That all fits together pretty well. The Dothraki have an ancient memory of coming over the Bones from the east, just as we read. The hard evidence points to the fact that thousands of people did just that. And two of those mountain passes lead right to the lands that the Dothraki now occupy. So it's all pretty neat, right? Although the Dothraki now rule the entire plain of the grasslands, that's only been true for the last 400 years, since the doom of Valyria and the century of blood that followed. Travelers named these the Haunted Lands for the many ruined cities that dot them, or the Great Desolation for their emptiness. But it is as the Dothraki see that these grasslands are best known today. That usage is comparatively recent, however, for the Dothraki are a young race, and it was only since the doom destroyed Valyria that their Khalasars came to dominate these lands, sweeping out of the east with fire and steel to conquer and destroy the ancient cities that once thrived here. That would be Sarnor primarily, and carrying off their people into bondage. The important part of that is the sweeping out of the east part. So before they spread out and conquered the kingdoms of Sarnor, which we'll talk about, of course, in a minute, the ancestors of the modern Dothraki existed basically in the steppes of the Bones Mountains, most likely east of the womb of the world, from the womb to the bones, which is, see, there's the womb of the world, there's the bones, and basically this is all the steppe land, and that's where horse peoples live, on the steppes, right? So that all makes sense. Let's see. Elsewhere in the same grassland section of the World of Ice and Fire, it speaks of the Sarnori leading, quote, many a foray against the bands of nomadic horsemen who roamed the steppes to their east throughout their history. So this is, again, the same thing. The horse lords lived on the steppes between the Bones and the Mother of Mountains, with the Sarnori being west of that. So the picture that emerges is that the ancestors of the Dothraki seem to have crossed the Bones in the north and then basically settled in the natural habitat that they found right on the other side, the steppe land. They remained bottled up in the east by the kingdom of Sarnor and the presence of Valyria for centuries and millennia, until they suddenly weren't. And then they swept westward. This next bit is the beginning of the Dothraki's encroachment on Sarnor following the doom. Contemptuous of the horse lords, who had been no more than a nuisance to them for centuries, the tall men of Sarnor ignored the threat from the east for far too long, even as the Khalasars began to raid across their eastern marches. So the tall men are the Sarnori, and their great kingdom, or federation of kingdoms, existed for several thousand years, essentially concurrent with the entire empire of Valyria. In the shadow of this great civilization existed the horse lords of the ancient Dothraki, or the ancestors of the Dothraki. We don't know at what point they began thinking about themselves as a cohesive nation, but essentially they had been no more than a nuisance to the Sarnori up until this century of blood and the doom. The Sarnori essentially prevented the Dothraki from spreading east, and this gives us the entire history of the Dothraki, more or less. Their ancestors crossed the Bones in the distant past, around the time of the Long Night. They settled on the steppe land, right on the other side of the mountains, and then when the giant post-Valyrian power vacuum opened up, they moved west and destroyed the kingdoms of Sarnor, making them rulers of the entire Grass Sea that they are now. So, Rosie, I think I just answered your question. I saw your question a few minutes ago, but it looks like I just answered it. Will Daenerys sail through the smoking sea to reach Volantis? Oh, that's a... Yeah, why not? Sure. I say yes. Quinn says yes, too. How not? How not? It is fantasy after a while. How are you not going to sail through the smoking sea, right?
If anybody can survive the ruins of old Valyria, it would be a Valyrian ancestor.
Or maybe they sail close and Dany gets on a dragon and has a little flyover.
She already has that sense that I'm Valyrian, Targaryen, and normal things don't affect me.
Yep, she has a point. Corliss Whitefire says, do you think during Resurrection, Jon could possibly have an encounter with the ancient empire of the Dawn King similar to the encounter Dany has? Oh, that's a cool idea that I've never thought of. Very cool. I mean, yeah, potentially. I would say it makes more sense for Dany because Dany's had this buildup of a shy and her Valyrian heritage throughout her entire plot that Jon hasn't. And I think what I see is that Jon and Dany, the teamwork they have to do is they have to put their heads together about the magical knowledge they have. Jon's going to know all about the others and the threat of the others. Dany's going to understand the dragons and where their Valyrian blood comes from. And I think putting all that together is what's going to help them figure out what they have to do. So probably they'll each have one piece of the puzzle. So now we can also observe that the Dothraki threat to the Sarnori seems to have built up gradually before finally overwhelming them. So we can probably infer that the destabilization of the fall of Valyria just sort of happened to coincide with the growth of the Dothraki's populace, power, and ambition. George actually even wrote a Genghis Khan-like figure into their history, Khal Mengo, who was the first Khal to, quote, unite the clans, as they say, turning fractious horse tribes into one unified and terrible fighting force, as Genghis Khan did with the Mongols. So if we had to guess when the Dothraki gained a cohesive ethnic identity as Dothraki, that's probably the time when it happened. Although it could go back further than that. So we're going to come back to the Sarnori and the discussion of the dispersal patterns following the collapse of the Great Empire. But before we move on from the Dothraki, let's stop and talk about their religion and their cultural beliefs, because they show evidence of a Great Empire of the Dawn heritage. And actually, we haven't really gone into the religion of the Great Empire of the Dawn very much, too, which we need to do. So we're going to come, okay. So the main such link is the idea of an astronomy-based religion. The first god emperor of the Great Empire of the Dawn was said to descend from heaven at the beginning of his life and then to ascend back to heaven at the end of his life. And the last god emperor was the Bloodstone Emperor, who of course worshipped a meteorite, founded the Church of Starry Wisdom, which is an actual astronomy-based cult that still exists in the current day of the story. So if a comet was the root cause of the long night, as I proposed, the Bloodstone Emperor, of course, he may have either timed his dark deeds to the arrival of the comet, or he might have even summoned it through dark magic. The official religion of the Great Empire of the Dawn seems to have been worship of the Maiden Maid of Light and the Lion of Night, who were thought of as being in harmony before the Long Night, when the Maiden Maid of Light then turned her back on the world and the Lion of Night came out to punish the wickedness of man. So that's the clue that we need to understand what this is about. The Maiden Maid of Light has to be the sun, or more specifically, the bright face of the sun, which is the thing that turned its back on the world, right? And in fact, in a different line, it says, from the Yiddish history, it says that the sun turned its back on the world. And then in this quote, it says, the Maiden Maid of Light turned its back on the world. So that's not hard to figure out. And in fact, what we're talking about is a Japanese sun goddess, Amaterasu. That's what George is basically using as the Maid of Light. It's a one-for-one adaptation there. Now, the Lion of Night, this is a little different. This is more fun. The Lion of Night is I've interpreted as both the esoteric idea of a dark sun as well as the alchemical idea of a philosopher's sun. So this is a whole ball of wax, which I can only just sort of dip into here. But essentially, the lion is the classic animal that depicts the sun, right? And so a lion of night, logic would dictate that it maybe is some sort of dark sun or night sun. And we find this idea in real world mythology. And sometimes it's basically, people think about the sun going underground at night, or they think about the night sky as being like the lack of the sun. Some people imagine this, it's like the sun has a dark side to it. The philosopher's sun idea that I hinted at, that's the idea that there's like the actual sun that we see is more like a mirror for some sort of true sun that exists on the etheric plane, if you will. And that, true adepts can see the philosopher's sun even at night. And there's a lot of cool Mayan and South American mythology ideas about a jaguar night sun. So I've talked about this elsewhere and I can't get into it fully, but the point is the Maiden Maid of Light and the Lion of Night are both the sun. And the sun is being expressed as a dichotomy. You can think of it just as day and night if you want. So Lion of Night, Maiden Maid of Light. That's the religion of the Great Empire of the Dawn. Now let's take a look about the Dothraki religion, which we know a lot more about. It's heavily based on astronomy. So first of all, they believe that the sun and moon are man and wife, and gods as well. It says, the two Dothraki girls giggled and laughed. You are foolish straw-head slave, Eerie said. Moon is no egg, moon is God, woman wife of sun. It is known. It is known, Jeekwe agreed. So we also know that Dany calls Drogo my sun and stars, while he calls her moon of my life. Now that probably reflects a natural association between the cow and the sun in Dothraki culture, just as kings all over the earth, of course, wear golden crowns to signify the favor of whatever sun god their culture worships. Sun gods, of course, aren't rare, very common, but it's worth noting that both the Dothraki and the Great Empire of the Dawn do regard the sun as their primary god. So, more important are the Dothraki beliefs concerning the stars. This is from the Dany chapter of A Game of Thrones. The Dothraki believed the stars were horses made of fire, a great herd that galloped across the sky by night. So even in Westeros, the Maesters know of this belief, and this is from a Theon chapter of A Clash of Kings. The crows came in the blue dusk with the evening stars. The Dothraki believed the stars are the spirits of the valiant dead, Theon said. Maester Luwin had told him that a long time ago. So this fiery horde, made up of the Dothraki ancestors and the Mother of Mountains with its black lake, the womb of the world, are basically the two holiest things in the Dothraki religion. Drogo swears by them when he vows to retake the Seven Kingdoms for Dany. He says, "This I swear before the Mother of Mountains as the stars look down and witness." So there's a lot of talk about the Dothraki doing things out in the open so the stars can bear witness. Those are their ancestors, after all. This has to remind us of how the first great empire, or the first emperor of the great empire, the god on earth, was thought to ascend to the stars at the end of his reign. And it says, for 10,000 years, the great empire of the dawn flourished in peace and plenty under the god on earth, until at last he ascended to the stars to join his forebears. So when you think back to Drogo's funeral pyre, from which the dragons hatched, Dany actually does perceive Drogo ascending to the stars. In fact, let's take a look at the Dothraki funeral ceremony, as it's really poetic and beautiful, as well as being interesting. And what I'm going to do here is I'm pulling the quotes from this scene all in order, but I'm cutting out a lot of the other stuff that doesn't have to do with the actual funeral rite. So I'm cutting out all the fun symbolism, and we're just going with the procedure here. So check this out. They took the two straightest trees, hacked the limbs and branches from them, skinned off their bark, and split them, laying the logs in a square. Its center they filled with straw, brush, bark shavings, and bundles of dry grass. Ricardo chose a stallion from the small herd that remained to them. He was not the equal of Khal Drogo's red, but few horses were. In the center of the square, Aggo fed him a withered apple and dropped him in an instant with an axe blow between the eyes. So this is all ritualistic. Okay, they're doing things in a very specific way. We've created a square. Then we're killing the horse right in the middle of the square. Then it says, over the carcass of the horse, they built a platform of hewn logs, trunks of smaller trees and limbs from the greater, and the thickest, straightest branches they could find. So they laid the wood east to west from sunrise to sunset. The third level of the platform was woven of branches no thicker than a finger and covered with dry leaves and twigs. They laid them north to south from ice to fire and piled them high with soft cushions and sleeping silks. So this is, guys, one of the only places where the phrase ice and fire is used. The only other ones I can recall are the oath that Jojen and Mira swear to Bran, and of course Rhaegar's comments about his son having a song of ice and fire. So that seems pretty significant, right? There's also the Undying talking about drinking from the cup of ice and the cup of fire, which is also significant. So this is a very old concept here. It's a deeply magical concept. The pyre is aligned with the cardinal directions, the aforementioned ice and fire for north and south, sunrise and sunset for east and west. That's a staple concept of pagan and hermetic magical traditions, and it's an intrinsically astronomical concept. It's an as above, so below alchemy type of deal. So after preparing Drogo's body by washing, braiding, scented oils, all that stuff, his body is placed on the pyre, and Dany spells out the specifics of the Dothraki belief. When a horse lord dies, his horse is slain with him, so he might ride proud into the nightlands. The bodies are burned beneath the open sky, and the call rises on his fiery steed to take his place among the stars. The more fiercely the man burned in life, the brighter his star will shine in the darkness. So George is also giving us some symbolic clues here to associate the Dothraki flaming steeds in the sky and dragons, as Drogo's fiery steed turns out to be the red comet, the dragon's tail, quote unquote. There's actually a whole other layer to this concept, of course, as the dragons themselves may contain the souls of dead dragon lords. And here I'm referring to an old theory by a friend from Westeros.org called J. Stargarian. And he decoded the puzzle of the Valerian-looking lemurs of the Norvashi forest. Let me see if I can pull up this link to drop in the chat. This is a fun old Westeros.org theory for you guys to keep when this stream is over here. There you go. Neither here nor there, but it's a fun little theory. So, at the very least, we can look at these beliefs about the stars and ascending to the stars and see that it could very well be a remnant of the beliefs of the great empire of the Dawn, which, you know, has the ancestors of the Dothraki. Oh, I screwed that whole sentence up. At the very least, we can look at these beliefs about the stars and ascending to the stars and see that it could very well work as a remnant of the beliefs of the great empire of the Dawn, which the ancestors of the Dothraki may have brought with them over the Bones Mountains. So as for which lineage of the great empire of the Dawn the Dothraki descend from, well, that's obvious. The Onyx Emperor, of course. The gemstones of the emperors correlate to eye color, at least in Dany's Wake the Dragon dream, and the very first time that Dany sees Drogo, in her very first chapter, we get this. Khal Drogo has never lost a fight. He is Aegon the Dragon Lord, come again, and you will be his queen. Dany looked at Khal Drogo. His face was hard and cruel, his eyes as cold and dark as onyx. So in this scene, Dany was comparing the cruelty of Viserys to Drogo's looks, while Illyrio calls him a reborn Dragon Lord. Aegon the Dragon Lord, come again. So we've got two implications of Drogo being a Dragon Lord when he's given these onyx eyes. So pretty cool. Then later, when Drogo's own cruelty is turned against Viserys, we get another Drogo's eyes as onyx reference. It says, even now Viserys did not understand. No, he shouted, you cannot touch me. I am the dragon, and I will be crowned. Khal Drogo unfastened his belt. The medallions were pure gold, massive and ornate, each one as large as a man's hand. He shouted a command. Cook slaves pulled a heavy iron stew pot from the fire pit, dumped the stew on the ground, and returned the pot to the flames. Drogo tossed in the belt and watched without expression as the medallions turned red and began to lose their shape. She could see fires dancing in the onyx of his eyes. So, as a nod to the astronomy side of things, note the comparison of Drogo to Aegon the Dragon Lord in the first scene, and the description of his eyes containing dancing fire as he prepared to kill the dragon, Viserys. So this is essentially... How do I put it? I guess I would say that Viserys is basically playing the moon here, and Drogo is the sun, you know, giving his fire to the moon. When he pours the molten gold onto Viserys' head, that is very much like the moon drinking the fire of the sun, is it not? So, yeah, it's a little mythical astronomy scene that's going there. In any case, it's just more Drogo, Sun King stuff. Of course, Drogo, his name is given to Drogon, the giant black dragon. So if you want to look at, it's basically just more dark sun imagery here. Drogo being a sun king with onyx black eyes. It sort of ties into the Lion of Night idea. He's, you know, the black dragon is named after him. So you could see, like, you could also see living Drogo as the bright face of the sun. And after he dies and becomes the black dragon, that's the dark face of the sun. So some cool astronomy going on here, but I don't want to get too bogged down into that. Now, did George really put in this bit about Onyx because he was already thinking of the Onyx Emperor in the Great Empire of the Dawn? Well, probably not. I think the Great Empire of the Dawn is something that George thought about over time. I think originally what he thought of was that there was the ancient ancestors of Valyria that came from Nhai. And I think that maybe what happened is he retconned Onyx into the list of the Great Empire of the Dawn kings because he knew that he had already associated the Dothraki's eyes with Onyx. But, you know, it's fun to try to figure out when George had what idea when. Since we know that he's a gardener and sort of develops things as he goes. But at the end of the day, whatever he decides is true has always been true. And thus, we have the idea that the Dothraki are sort of implied as having fled the Great Empire of the Dawn. Now, here's the thing. Eyes, eyes or no eyes. I mean, they're telling us that the Dothraki came over the bones. So I'm just looking at the eye color as like a fun little extra thing. But the main thing I want you to take is actually just the hard evidence there that the Dothraki came over the mountains. So that's the Dothraki section. We're going to go on to the Jogos Nhai, and I need to actually stretch my legs doing the crisscross applesauce. Oh, it's not as fun as standing. I don't have my standing desk right now set up in a place where I can live stream and have good audio quality. So that's why I've been using the couch lately. But yeah, let me stretch my legs real quick, and I'll be right back. Talk amongst yourselves, as I always say. Hello, folks. I'm back. Turn the camera on in just a second. I love that you guys let me go take a quick bathroom break, and I don't lose any viewers. You guys are so awesome. Just the best. It almost feels like you guys appreciate me entertaining you. Ah, yes. Figured I'd show off my street cred here. This is an original Rage Against the Machine from the mid-90s. I have somehow kept it relatively intact all that time. Don't ask me how. It's actually not quite as white as the camera's making it look. But yeah, this is the classic ball and chain Rage shirt. It's one of the original ones. There you go. You can see the entire world is a prison. They're trying to build a prison. System of a Down is great too. Listened to an entire System of a Down album last night, actually. But where were we? The Jogos Nhai. This is actually, I was looking for a black and white shirt to express my support for Zorses, who are, of course, our zebras. Oh, I see a couple of people saying they have this shirt. Solidarity. Yes, but what was I saying? The Jogos Nhai, the Zorse Lords. I don't have any black and white stripes, so, this is as close as I could come. But it's on topic for what I was talking about earlier. So, the Jogos Nhai. Oh, there was a super chat. Steampunk Overlord. Thank you. I love giving you guys content. It's lots of fun. My favorite thing to do. So, the Jogos Nhai have a culture with, actually, gosh, I'm going to talk about Rage Against the Machine for a second. So, of course, one of their famous lines, some of those that burn crosses are the same that work forces. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. They are saying that was on the first Rage Against the Machine album that came out in 1992. 1992, I was 12 years old. And I was growing up in a Christian conservative household with very little sunlight peeking in. And when you read something like that, you can't even understand it. Like, you're like, what? Police? KKK? What are you talking about? I never heard about that. And you could pick any other line from any other Rage song, and it's the same thing. You're like, what? And it's so counter to everything that I had in my head that it forced me to think about it. It's the same thing for when you hear Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre talking about 187 on a cop. 187 is the police code for a police killing. So why are they talking about killing police? Why is Rage talking about the police or the Klan? Like, these are very extreme statements they're making. But the reason why you make a statement like that is because it causes people to think and ask questions. Well, why would people want to shoot the police? That's horrible. Like, oh, well, because the police are shooting people and getting away with it. Why would Rage say something like that? Well, because the police, especially in the southern states, has a very long history with the KKK, with slave patrols. This is real history that gets erased and lost. So when I've talked a lot about my journey from, like I said, a very repressive, fundamentalist Christian household. I wasn't taught evolution until I got out of high school and all this stuff. And I've come a long way as far as evolution of my thinking and stuff. Rage Against the Machine, one of the biggest and first ingredients in that awakening for me. So sorry for jumping on the whatever that was, soapbox or something, but these things are important to me. You know, I'm all about ideas. That's what we're talking about on this podcast, is ideas that transform, and you know, political ideas are the same. Like an idea that causes you to think, that frees you from dogma, that sets you on a path of learning. These are the most powerful things in the world, ideas. So that's why I do this podcast, really. Like, these powers of these ideas about symbolism and myth have transformed me a lot, has led to a lot of personal transformation over the last 5 years. And so it's just, I don't know, like I said, this isn't just entertainment for me. We're not just talking about the latest show on television that's popular. I've been banging on about A Song of Ice and Fire for 6 years because it's the mythology. Oh yeah, I listen to Kendrick. I definitely do. Kendrick's the man. And what he did at the Grammys was just unbelievable. But in any case, let's get back on the rails here. Jogos Nhai. Kendrick Lamar, dude, he's like one of the most impressive rappers I've ever heard. And I grew up listening to like Tupac. But dude, what Kendrick does with rhythmic timing almost reminds me of Tool. That would be fun to talk about. Like the time weirdness that he does with the way that he raps over the beat. He juxtaposes time signature essentially the same way that like Tool's drummer does. That's some deep stuff. But any case, we're way off topic now. The Jogos Nhai. The Jogos Nhai have a culture which parallels that of the Dothraki in many ways, but with many key differences that sort of obscure the parallel. And once I show you this parallel, you guys are not going to believe that you didn't see it before. It's very thorough. So think about this. Logic would dictate that the Dothraki culture has branched off from other... Logic would dictate that the Dothraki culture is the one that branched off from the original Horse Lord culture, right? Since they're the one that came over the mountains from the lands which the Jogos Nhai still inhabit. So think about this. Before the Dothraki came over the mountains, they would have been in the same spot as the Jogos Nhai. That's what I'm trying to say. And the Jogos Nhai are riding Zorses instead of horses, and they're shorter. But it's the same cultural idea where it's a horse culture. They have all the same steppe people sort of, things. So essentially the big difference is the height and the animals. It seems that they only had Zorses east of the bones. And so that's what the Jogos Nhai ride. We can probably infer that the Dothraki ancestors used to ride Zorses on the eastern side of the mountains. But then when they went over the mountains and found horses, they just transferred and adapted their Zorse riding skills to the bigger horses that they found on the other side of the mountain. And then 8,000 years of evolution later, you have the Dothraki being very tall, and you have the Jogos Nhai remaining short because you have to be small to ride the little Zorses. They're small. Like large Jogos Nhai don't survive and pass on their genes because they can't ride the Zorses. So the most successful Jogos Nhai Zorse riders are going to be those short little wiry dudes, and that's what they got. So, and dudettes too. I think they. Anyways, we'll get to that. So, unlike the Dothraki, whose cows lead huge khalasars across the grasslands, the Jogos Nhai travel in small bands, closely connected by blood. Each band is led by a Jot, which means war chief, and a moon singer, who combines the role of priestess, healer, and judge. The Jot leads in war and battle and raid, whilst the other matters are ruled by the band's moon singer. Of course, that sounds a very similar breakdown as you have with the Dothraki, with their calls ruling, the calls ruling all the matters of war. But then you come to the Mother of Mountains, and you have to listen to the women. So Dothraki cows make endless war on one another beyond the sacred precincts of Vaes Dothrak, their holy city. Now, the big difference here, the gods of the Jogos Nhai forbid them to shed the blood of their own people. Young men do ride out to steal goats, dogs, and zorses from other bands, and the sisters go forth to abduct husbands in a weird sort of reversal of wildling culture. But these rituals are, quote, hallowed by the gods of the plains. No blood may be shed during them. So they're not killing each other. These are cultural practices. So instead, the Jogos Nhai make endless war upon everyone else. This is what we're told. From the Golden Empire of Yeti, to the former patrimony of Herkun, to the vanished stone giants of the Northern Bones Mountains, the Jogwin, and also the Nhai, a people who've been reduced to one foggy underground city. Everyone around the Jogos Nhai gets their ass kicked by the Jogos Nhai. That's essentially what we find. They are total ass kickers. So although the Dothraki khalasars are much larger than the bands of the Jogos Nhai, they are united by an oath of brotherhood between the Khal and his blood riders, which can be seen as a kind of ritual adoption. The ancient horse riders, think about this, fleeing over the mountains, would likely have been fragments of decimated kin groups. So it makes sense that they might have adopted one another via blood oath as a way of uniting to survive in the new land. And that idea comes from somebody named Brainfire Bob of Westeros.org. Like I said, this original essay goes back 5 years to Westeros.org when I was still collaborating with people there. So yeah, think about that, guys. Like the Jogos Nhai, their bands are united by actual blood. The Dothraki have bigger groups, but they all adopt each other as blood brothers. So this to me really seems like something that would have come up in the wake of, like I said, this fleeing over the mountains when all the kin groups would have been shattered. So the Jogos Nhai taboo against killing other Jogos Nhai seems to have broken down during the course of the Dothraki's migration and establishment of the new culture. However, we do see an echo of this tradition in the Dothraki taboo against making war on each other within sight of the Mother of Mountains, or shedding blood of any kind in Vaes Dothrak. So both of our nomadic horse warrior cultures seem to eschew the idea of inherited right to rule. The Dothraki cows are always the mightiest warriors, and if they become injured or weak, they lose their legitimacy and authority. And we saw that when Drogo fell from his horse, it was over. Everyone was like silent, be like, oh, he fell from his horse. Like, that shit's over, dude. So, Jogo said, a cow who cannot ride is no cow. The Dothraki follow only the strong, Ser Jorah said. So there you go. And then a moment later it says, they took Khal Drogo's herds, Khaleesi Rakara said. We were too few to stop them. It is the right of the strong to take from the weak. They took many slaves as well, the cows and yours, yet they left some few. So we don't get the details of how the moon singers and the Jots are chosen. The Jots, remember, those are the war leaders of the Jogos Nhai. But the Jogos Nhai do occasionally raise up a Jatar, a war leader, or Jot of Jots, which seem to be a matter of choosing and not family legacy. So when they have their big leaders, they are chosen. If there's a call of the Jogos Nhai that unites the clans, it's a matter of choosing and not family legacy. So we're told that when facing extinction at the hands of Lo Bu, the 43rd Scarlet Emperor of Yeti, 1,000 rival clans of Jogos Nhai gathered together and chose a female warrior named Zia Zorsface as Jatar. And that turned out to be a great decision because she laid waste to Lo Bu. And that's a great little story in the world of Ice and Fire. So this is probably a good place to, like I said, underscore the badassery of the Jogos Nhai. Not only did Zia Zorsface string out Lo Bu's 13 armies, isolating and destroying each in turn, before killing Lo Bu himself, gilding his skull, and making a drinking cup out of it. We also hear of somebody named Garrick Squint Eye, who slew the last of the Jogwin, the stone giants of the Bones Mountains. So it's hard to say what those stone giants really were, but they don't sound like easy prey, right? The Jogos Nhai also whooped up on Harkoon for many centuries and likely had something to do with their downfall, like I said. So it seems likely that the tight familiar bonds of the Jogos Nhai and their extreme hostility to outsiders arose as a survival mechanism during the anarchy of the Long Night and the difficult living conditions that would have persisted long afterwards. I mean, that's what we're told, right? Every clan, every tribe of man went separate ways, and they were suspicious of all the others. So, oh gosh, it's 420 again. How does this keep happening? Can you hook me up? Ah, yes. So, as the horse riding, like I said, we're told the Bloodstone Emperor's disaster caused everyone to flee, suspicious of all the others. The Jogos Nhai fit that description perfectly. They're very hostile to everyone who's not Jogos Nhai. Right over here. Just hand me the... Yep. Got that too. Thank you, sir. And, oh, something's wrong with my camera. It seems to be going out. What's wrong?
Technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties.
We'll be right back after this brief message.
Check out Tadia on Indiegogo.
Wow, this is amazing production. We have commercials all of a sudden. This is great. Must be making a lot of money. Anyways, so the horse riding. So like I said, think about this. Everyone's fleeing the great empire of the Dawn lands, right? Well, the Jogos Nhai stuck around. They didn't flee, or at least if they fled the southern part, they didn't go that far. They didn't go over the mountains. So they would have had to be tough as nails to survive all that. And that's probably the best description of the Jogos Nhai. Tough as nails. Compact and deadly. So physically, the Jogos Nhai, like I said, they're much shorter than the Dothraki, and their skin tends a little more towards yellow than the bronze of the Dothraki. And this does beg the question of where the height of the Dothraki came in. Were they always a taller cousin to the ancient Jogos Nhai, even when they were part of the great empire of the Dawn? Or did they gain their height through intermarriage with the ancient people of the grasslands after crossing the mountains? We're about to get into the Sarnori, who are very tall, like the Dothraki, only even more so, actually. And they have basically the same skin, hair, and eye coloring as the Dothraki. So there's definitely a potential for the idea that the tall genes existed on the western side, on the Sarnori side, and that they entered the Dothraki gene pool after they crossed the mountains. That seems to be the most likely scenario. So the Dothraki reverence for the Mother of Mountains and the womb of the world is certainly lunar in nature. Okay, so mountains whose peaks float in the sky like moons, like we just heard in Colloquo Votar's or Lomas Longstrider's description of the bones. Lakes whose surfaces shine like the moon. These are moon symbols. They're used as metaphors for moons all throughout the series. You guys know that. Mountains and lakes, two of the biggest moon symbols. The Silver Sea itself is a definite lunar symbol. I mean, it's silver, right? So now it's a mirror. It's a mirror lake as well. And the womb of the world bears the same symbolism as the Silver Sea. Most importantly, we know that the Dothraki view the moon itself as a goddess and as the wife of the sun. So the Jogos Nhai, on the other hand, they have an extreme reverence for their moon singers, who basically govern all aspects of life that don't have to do with war. Although the Dothraki cows are always male, the crones of the Dush Kalin have absolute authority and are obeyed without question inside of Vaes Dothrak, which sits at the foot of the Mother of Mountains by the womb of the world. So, this seems like an echo of the power held by the moon singers, and we have to notice that twice now we see the Dothraki revert to practices much closer to those of the Jogos Nhai when they get close to the place of their origin, the womb of the world and the Mother of Mountains. They don't make war upon one another, and they place the power in the hands of the women. So as I said above, the war leaders of the Jogos Nhai, the Jots, they were usually male, and the moon singers governed all aspects of other society. So in a strange inversion of wildling culture, like I said, the women of the Jogos Nhai kidnap their husbands. So that's more matriarchy. So in other words, the women, and specifically the moon singers, are generally more powerful than men in the daily life of the Jogos Nhai. So thus we see that the Jogos Nhai are actually much closer to a matriarchal society than their taller horse-riding cousins to the west, which fits with the general theme of society moving towards patriarchy after the long night. And I haven't talked about that a whole lot, but it is something that you can find if you look around. Just the fact that the Dothraki Sea used to be the Silver Sea, ruled over by the Fisher Queens, and now they're ruled over by the Dothraki. So the Jogos Nhai also have somewhat flexible gender roles, which is not something that patriarchy is really known for. And it's as is acceptable in their society for a woman to be chosen to be a warrior or a man to choose to be a moon singer, though a woman choosing the life of a warrior must dress and live as a man and vice versa. So Mary Mazdur met a moon singer in Nhai while she was studying magic there. Check out the quote. She said, "When I was younger and more fair, I went in caravan to Nhai by the shadow to learn from their mages. Ships from many lands come to Nhai, so I lingered long to study the healing ways of distant peoples. A moon singer of the Jogos Nhai gifted me with her birthing songs." So there's a nice bit of symmetry here, as Dany herself represents the moon, of course, and Drogo calls her the moon of my life and all that, right after this quote, in fact. And not only is the moon strongly associated with femininity in cultures all around the world in A Song of Ice and Fire, we have the specific theme of sacrifice and childbirth death, running all through the series, right? All the women of a lot of the main characters in the Azor High people end up dying in childbirth, like Lyanna or Dany's mother. And this pattern began, of course, with the death of the second moon, which cracked to give birth to dragons, which is what Dany represents, that second moon. So, yes, it makes sense for the moon singers to know the birthing songs, I guess. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, the moon birthed dragons, that's kind of the big myth that we're referring to here. So, of course, the moon singers related to birth. Makes you think of the womb of the world. Like I said, this is nothing cryptic here. This is all standard moon goddess, mother goddess type of mythology here. So the moon singers of the Jogos Nhai are also demonstrating the important Song of Ice and Fire theme of everything having its song. So the Church of Starry Wisdom sings to the stars. Melisandre and the R'hllor do a lot of singing at their night fires. The name of the children of the forest is those who sing the Song of Earth. There's even the songs the drowned men sing. So it's safe to say that the moon singers, whatever songs they sing, this is something that has to do with a deep reference for the moon. And it just sort of shows you, like, they are priestesses. So given that they lived inside of the Great Empire of the Dawn, they may well have had a moon destruction legend similar to that Carthian origin of dragons story, one would think. Their reverence for the moon may have something to do with a sense of gratitude for the moon that we have left, perhaps, a memorial for the one which we lost, or perhaps the joy that was felt the first time the clouds cleared enough after the long night and they could see the remaining moon again. And if you go over to the Temple of the Moon Singers in Braavos, it's all ice moon stuff. It's cold white marble, milk glass, and other cool ice moon symbolism. So I don't want to get into all that, but I do tend to associate the moon singers with ice symbolism for what it's worth. And that's the moon we have left if you buy any of my 2 moons claptrap. So anyways, let's get to the Sarnor part. This is the part I really want to get to. How's y'all in chat doing? This is a good comment. Off topic, but good. I'm going to highlight it here. From Paladin Pony T. When Jon is brought back, I think Euron will be doing his magic become a god thing at some time. The 2 rituals will touch. I agree. Here's why. The fall of the new long night is most clearly associated with both Jon and Euron. Jon is the one who's tied to the fall of the wall, like over and over and over again. Over so many times. I might make a short video about this, but I pointed it out in Moons of Ice and Fire, Ice Moon Apocalypse. There's like 10 quotes about the wall either looking like it's going to fall, about how the wall's the end of the world. If it ever collapses, the world will collapse with it. All this stuff. It's always a Jon chapter. Every time it's Jon. So then you have the idea of the dragon locked in ice. Jon is this ice dragon symbol. He's a Targaryen, but wrapped in the clothing of a Stark. He's an Azor High person, but he's at the Watch. He had red blade burning this fist, but he's armored in black ice. So he's got all this cool ice and fire stuff. And the idea that his body is going to be put in the wall, it makes the wall kind of like his tomb. And so the idea of the ice moon breaking when the wall breaks. It's all tied to Jon's resurrection. So I've been trying to figure out for like 3 or 4 years how Jon's resurrection is going to be tied to whatever new moon meteor event we have, the fall of the wall, the fall of the new long night. I think all that stuff's going to be tied together. But of course, Euron is also tied to all those things, right? Euron is the one who resembles the Bloodstone Emperor. He's trying to become a god. He thinks the comet heralds the end, and he wants to be the new god rising from the graves and charnel pits, and he probably wants to Nissa Dany. So he's got the Dragonbinder horn, which I suspect could be part of a way, if there's a way for a sorcerer to summon a comet, it might be the Dragonbinder horn, since comets are dragons. Dragonbinder could mean comet binder. That's another theory that I've actually got half written and need to put out. So the two people associated with ideas relating to a new long night falling, a new moon disaster, the wall falling, are Jon and Euron. Now, Jon and Euron are very opposite in terms of character. So this has to be a magical connection. And so your comment, Paladin Pony, about somehow the spells touching, the rituals touching, coinciding at the same time, I absolutely think something like that is going to happen. I have no idea how it's going to happen because it's a very open-ended idea. But I would expect Euron and Jon both to be involved in whatever magic accidentally or intentionally calls a comet back and causes the new long night to happen. So thanks for that question. That was a great one. Totally right in my wheelhouse. And I just want to say real quick, thank you to Curtis, who sent in a PayPal. Your streams are keeping me sane. I get a lot of comments, by the way, along those lines. Your streams are keeping me sane. Thanks for keeping me entertained during COVID. So obviously that's trying to step it up as much as I can here during these times, and I'm glad that I'm providing some relief. That's awesome. So let's go ahead and get ready for Sarnor. Time to talk Sarnor. This is the last section, by the way. When will I talk about Melisandre? Matilda asks. Well, I talk about Melisandre a lot in a lot of my older podcasts. What specifically, I wonder, would you like me to speak about with Melisandre? I have many thoughts. I do like Melisandre quite a bit. If I ever stop streaming, the world will fall, and the wall with it. Well, I'll never stop streaming then. Never. So Sarnor. Guys, the kingdoms of the Sarnori and the Rhoynar probably tie for the title of places you'd want to live if you were living in a Song of Ice and Fire. These are the most beautiful and advanced civilizations since the Long Night. And once again, the Rhoynar and the Kingdom of Sarnor. So, tragically, the Dothraki destroyed the Sarnori, and the Valyrians destroyed the Rhoynar. So, knowing as we do that many people seem to have fled westward over the Bones Mountains and into the grasslands, we certainly have to take a look at the first and greatest post-Long Night empire of the grasslands, the Kingdom of Sarnor. The people of the grasslands from which Sarnor arose seem to represent their own diaspora, independent of the Great Empire of the Dawn. It must be said. However, some remnants of Great Empire of the Dawn culture do seem to have come over the mountains with the ancestors of the Dothraki and the other fugitives, and the same may be true of the ancestors of the Sarnori. There's a nice little tip-off to look for Great Empire of the Dawn fingerprints in this line about the Kingdom of Sarnor from the World of Ice and Fire. And it says, their gleaming cities were strewn across the grasslands like jewels across a green velvet mantle, shining beneath the light of sun and stars. So jewels across a green mantle definitely calls to mind the gemstone emperors of the Great Emperor of the Dawn for me, because jade and green pearls are what they wore. So a little bit of explanation here. Yi Ti is the most direct descendant of the Great Empire of the Dawn. They call themselves the Golden Empire of Yi Ti, and they call themselves God Emperors, just like the Great Empire of the Dawn did. So there's a little bit of inference here, but the Emperors of Yi Ti, jade is their whole thing. Like, they all wear jade, they all wear green pearls. So when you think about gemstones and green, like, that is essentially the look of both the Great Empire of the Dawn and Yi Ti. So when I read this jewels across the green mantle, kind of perked my interest. And especially the shining beneath the light of sun and stars makes you think of a civilization connected to astronomy. But it's just wordplay. I don't want to make too much of that. It's just one of those little potential hints. But there's evidence to back up this idea. Like I said, the refugees from the east would have passed through these grasslands. So let's take a look. Now, the Sarnori, on top of everything, they're just really cool and interesting. They're worth looking at just on their own. Many amazing things and places are briefly alluded to. We hear about the palace with 1,000 rooms where the High King dwelt, Sathar, the waterfall city, Salash, the city of scholars with its vast library and painted walls, Sarnath of the tall towers, Mardosh the unconquerable, not so unconquerable as it turns out, but they were, quote, warriors, sorcerers, and scholars. And that's pretty much a match for our general perception of the Great Empire of the Dawn as rulers who embrace the use of magic and the pursuit of starry wisdom and knowledge. Ice dragon powers woken by the horn of Joramun. So yeah, just to go back to that whole long night thing, like I said, you've got the Dragonbinder horn that Euron has, which has a bunch of Lightbringer symbolism. It splits the air like a shivering hot scream and like a sword thrust. So it's like an ice and fire sword. It's also like a woman's scream, which makes you think of Nissanissa's cry that broke the moon and Widow's wail and stuff like that. Then we have the horn of Joramun, which is said to wake giants in the earth and bring down the wall. So between the idea that a horn is kind of like Lightbringer and can crack the moon, and a horn can crack the wall or bring the wall down, I think we're going to actually have one horn that brings moon meteors and breaks the wall. I don't know which horn it'll be, but I think that is the idea behind the horn. So the doom that came to Sarnath is, of course, a Lovecraft story. And George is playing off of that with the destruction of the Sarnori for sure. I don't have time to get into that either, but yeah. So, and a follow-up on the Melisandre thing. Martin says, Melo's misunderstood. Do you have thoughts on what he might mean by that? And what do you find most interesting and important about her? So let me put a pin in that and come back to that, Matilda. But yes, that's a good question. And we did talk about in the Darkest Nightfire, Winds of Winter episode that I did with Quinn. And by the way, all of you other YouTubers doing Winds of Winter prediction videos, we see y'all.
We see
y'all, which is cool. It's cool. I mean, I'll say it like this. Hopefully we're all collectively manifesting Winds of Winter into existence. Exactly. But yeah.
We are not gatekeepers. Everyone's free to do it.
Everyone can make their Winds of Winter prediction videos. But we did notice they all sort of sprung up like mushrooms after a rain.
Yeah.
Right on about April. But anyways, moving right along. I recommend the Darkest Nightfire one. We did go into some of those ideas, Matilda, about Melisandre. I think she's misunderstood in the sense that, like, she basically thinks she's doing the right thing. She's not an inhuman monster. For example, she tries to spare one of Davos's last sons because she feels bad that Davos has lost his children in the Blackwater. So I think that's what George means, is that Melisandre is not Euron. She's not malevolent. She is trying to do the right thing. She's just she's a fundamentalist. She's a religious extremist, a true believer. And the thing is, we have true believers and fundamentalists on Earth without magic, and Melisandre can actually do magic. So it's not a wonder that she's a true believer and could go down dark paths of justifying, like self-sacrifice, not human sacrifice, I should say, and all that kind of stuff. So. Here's a good question, Paladin Pony, another one. Sarnori helped Old Valyria in some of their wars, that's true. Do you think there were knowledge share between them? Almost assuredly. Dragon lore and Valyrian steel, probably so. The Sarnori had steel, so did the Rhoynar, and the Sarnori were very advanced. Absolutely, they would have been trading knowledge with Valyria, for sure. And that sort of adds to the mystique. And you just really wonder, if we could just get some of these old books, we could probably find out so much about the old world. Martin has intentionally hidden all this stuff because the Doom wiped out all of Valeria's knowledge, and the Maesters are secretive about magic, and the Rhoynar are gone, so Shai is hard to reach. So there are places that are going to have records of the Great Empire of the Dawn and all this stuff, more about the Long Night, Azor Ahai, but George is hiding them from us very intentionally. So, all right, so getting back to my script here. Sarnori themselves are heirs to an older legacy, which traces back to the Dawn Age, that isn't the Great Empire of the Dawn. That's the kingdom of the Fisher Queens, who ruled the lands adjacent to the now vanished Silver Sea. The maesters of the world of ice and fire, in somewhat contradictory fashion, give us several places as the site of the, quote, first civilization as we know it. Gis is called that. Yeti is called that. The grasslands of the River Sarn, referring to the pre-Sarnori, proto-Sarnori, the people of the Silver Sea, and the first cities of the Roinar, Ashai. All of these places are suggested as the first civilization. Okay, so we don't really know, and that's the point. So the point is that we don't know for sure. All of these places are very old. That's kind of what we can infer from this. They were among the first to arise after the global disaster of the Long Night, which is basically as long as anybody's memories extend. So real quick, I just want to grab this super chat. I saw actually 2 go by real quick. Steampunk Overlord says, when will the Winds of Winter release? Well, George has said something about you can lock him in a cell or something if he doesn't have an announcement by the end of, I think it's July. So kind of feel like we're going to get at least an update from George in the next month or two. I am always on the confident side. I believe in George very much. You guys can see how much I admire him as a writer, and I do believe that he's got it under control. He knows what he's doing. He's gardening his way to epic fantasy in a way that no one has ever done before, and I think he'll be able to land the plane. So that's all I'll say about that. Cross your fingers. Wish him well. Send him happy thoughts. And, okay, no, I got that one. Just want to make sure I get to all my super chats. Cool. Oh, they're different colors. Okay, that's why I'm thinking there's more than one. I've got 2 chats open. Sorry, behind the scenes stuff. Pay no attention to the details behind the curtain. So the Sarnori guys, like I said, they descend from the Fisher Queens, at least in some parts. So we have to talk about the Fisher Queens real quick. It was here amidst these grasses that civilization was born in the Dawn Age, 10,000 years ago or more, when Westeros was yet a howling wilderness inhabited only by the giants and the children of the forest. The first true towns arose beside the banks of the River Sarn and beside the myriad vassal streams that fed her on her meandering course northward to the shivering sea. The histories of those days are lost to us, sad to say, for the kingdoms of the grass came and went in large measure before the race of man became literate. Only the legends persist. From such we know of the Fisher Queens, who ruled the lands adjoining the Silver Sea, the great inland sea at the heart of the grasslands, from a floating palace that made its way endlessly around its shores. The Fisher Queens were wise and benevolent and favored of the gods, we are told, and the lords and kings and wise men sought the floating palace for their counsel. Beyond their domains, however, other peoples rose and fell and fought, struggling for a place in the sun. Some maesters believe that the first men originated here, before beginning the long westward migration that took them across the arm of Dorne to Westeros. The Andals, too, may have arisen in the fertile fields south of the Silver Sea. So at some point, guys, the mythical-sounding kingdom of the Fisher Queens came to an end. The Silver Sea was reduced to 3 large lakes, one of which seems to be the womb of the world, by the way. I would certainly place my money on this decline occurring at, or at least beginning with the Long Night disaster. The realm of the Fisher Queens certainly sounds like a Dawn Age affair, and their matriarchal society, wise, just reputation, favor of the gods, all that stuff kind of matches with the idea of unspoiled world, Atlantis-like, existence. The symbolism of the Silver Sea, ruled by a matriarch, is strongly evocative of moon imagery, and the Silver Sea itself fits the pattern. Let me skip that part here. What am I trying to say? So, like I said, the Silver Sea, it's unclear, basically, we don't know how accurate the map of Lands of Ice and Fire is, but the map only shows 2 large lakes close to the kingdoms of Sarnor. It says that the Silver Sea is now 3 lakes. The only 3rd lake that we can really find on the map would be the Silver Sea. And if you connect the Silver Sea to those 2 lakes, you have like most of the Dothraki Sea covered. So I think I can do this. Let's see here. See these 2 lakes here? 1, 2. Those are the 2 lakes. These are all the Sarnori kingdoms right around here. But if you go up here, that's the womb of the world. So if that was connected to those 2 lakes, that means the Silver Sea was like, it was big. Big. It was big. So, anyways, Point being, and yes, Crowfood's daughter, I saw somebody already mention this in the chat. Crowfood's daughter has a very cool video about the Silver Sea. She goes way deep on the idea of inland seas in the real world and how they're created and all that stuff. It's way, way good research, and I'm posting it here in the chat. So check that out. So here's the interesting thing, all right? Think about moon imagery. From the Silver Sea to the womb of the world to the mother of mountains. It's all there. So when we consider the Dothraki tale of the first men emerging from... Oh, the first men. Okay, right. Sorry, the script that I wrote here is a little bit... It needs improvement. I didn't clarify this part enough, and I'm reading over it here, and it's a little... I'm tripping over my words. Let me rephrase this real quick for you guys. So what we have here, we're tracing the cultural lineages. Basically, what I'm suggesting is that the Sarnori have some things that came from the Fisher Queen kingdoms and some things that came from the Great Empire of the Dawn. So when you look at, and when the Sarnori and the Dothraki, okay? So the Dothraki, the fact that they revere the womb of the world, and they have one legend, even though they have legends of their ancestors crossing the Bones Mountains, they also have this origin legend of the first rider and the first horse emerging from the womb of the world, right? You guys probably remember that from a Game of Thrones. That is an echo of the Fisher Queen Silver Sea idea, because the Fisher Queens are essentially, they are god emperors, just like the Great Empire of the Dawn. And they are the origin of civilization in this area. And their empire is long gone. And so what you basically have here is the echo of that idea, that the goddess, the origin of mankind, the goddess of mankind, she lives in a lake. And so now we have the womb of the world. It's a lake where mankind comes from. So there's very much a cultural echo of the Silver Sea idea. And so that tells us that some of that Fisher Queen matriarchal idea, specifically the water symbolism, made its way into Dothraki culture. That's what I'm seeing here. So following the fall of the Fisher Queens, and we're going back to the World of Ice and Fire history here, there's three principal surviving groups that are named: the Cymeri, the Zokora, and the Gips. And they were conquered and assimilated by a group who came to be called Sarnori. They called themselves Teges Fen, the Tall Men. The legendary founder of Sarnor, the man who, quote, took to wife a daughter of the greatest of the greatest lords and kings, from each of these three peoples, to unite them and bind them to his will, was Huzhor Amai. I need to say that differently. Huzhor Amai. That's better. Huzhor Amai, the amazing. He was supposedly born of the last of the Fisher Queens. So let me just put this together for you here. The Sarnori kingdom is traced back to this dude, Huzhor Amai. And he is a guy that unified these other three people, the Cymeri, the Zokora, and the Gips, by taking a wife from each of these three people. So this is basically a new nation being formed. Thank you, Pat Riley. Thank you. Just in case anyone didn't get it. And so what's unclear is whether or not the Teges Fen were people that were from that area or who came to that area and conquered these three people. But somehow these three people were united and became the Sarnori. Now, he claims descent from the last of the Fisher Queens. And that tells you that there is a close transference of authority that comes from the Fisher Queen Silver Sea people to the Sarnori. The Sarnori are laying claim to that power, that mantle of authority of the Fisher Queens. And that name, Huzhor Amai, sounds a lot like Azor Ahai, right? I mean, it's very, very similar. Okay. And the Fisher Queen name, well, that's just a reference to Arthurian legend, of course, and the idea of a Fisher King. And a Fisher King is a keeper of the Grail, which seems to be a metaphor for the bloodline of Christ, who is known as the Fisher of Men. So a Fisher King, it's very closely tied to the idea of a promised savior, a reborn savior. And then you have this guy who sounds like Azor Ahai, Hugh and he's the last descendant of the Fisher Queens. So George is really pulling from like established mythology here, and he's tying it into Azor Ahai. So it's tempting to think that Hugh last of the Fisher Queens, could be a garbled memory of a legendary ancestral hero named Azor Ahai. Now, even though I believe Azor Ahai was originally a bad dude, at some point he obviously became remembered as a hero. So this could be plausible. However, all the other Flaming Sword heroes come from the other side of the Bones Mountains, and nothing else about Hugh and his story sounds like Azor Ahai of the Bloodstone Emperor. He doesn't have a flaming sword. There's no black stone, no dark magic, no wife murder. He's not remembered with the Long Night. Okay. So I think it's probable that the Sarnori language is phonetically similar to that of the Great Empire of the Dawn, because some part of the Sarnori language originated in the Great Empire of the Dawn. The last hero of the Sarnori during their downfall at the hands of the Dothraki only 400 years ago was named Mazor Alexi, which is another name that bears very strong resemblance to Azor Ahai. But clearly Mazor Alexi lived only 400 years ago and is definitely not another name for Azor Ahai. So what I think, this lends credence to my idea that it's actually a phonetic root here between the Sarnor and the Great Empire of the Dawn. The names Azor Ahai and Hugh are perhaps both derived from an older hero, from the same root word, something like that. Some ancient figure of the Great Empire of the Dawn. Perhaps Azor is a title. People have suggested that as well. We don't know. I mean, these 10,000-year-old words here. But we notice the similar words between the Sarnori and the Great Empire of the Dawn. We see that it's their heroes that have these names that sound like Azor Ahai. Well, like I said, this is probably a tradition of some kind of giving a hero's name to people that look like heroes. Thank you, V-Star. So it's also possible that one or more people assimilated into Sarnori culture that were descendants of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and they simply brought this name or their language with them. That's not alternate. That's really the same idea. Sorry. You guys see what I'm saying, though. So it's ambiguous as to whether or not the Sarnori were living in the former Silver Sea area before they assimilated these surrounding peoples, or whether they migrated there and conquered. The Silver Sea Kingdom of the Fisher Queens is almost certainly a pre-Long Night culture, but the actual, quote, Kingdom of Sarnor arose approximately concurrent with Gis and Valyria, which means right after the Long Night. We know the Sarnori fought in the wars between Valyria and Gis, like one of the super chatters alluded to earlier, and the last of those was 5,000 years ago, according to Danny's memory. So the rise of Sarnor is at least 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. So this all lines up. Sarnor has existed since shortly after the Long Night, and they ended only 400 years ago. So that's like an 8,000-year-old empire. Pretty significant. The timing of their conquest potentially lines up with an exodus from the Great Empire of the Dawn territory, because, again, right after the Long Night, right? They claim a descent from the line of the Fisher Queens, but this could also be a case of a conqueror donning his floppy ears. So just like Dany comes to Meereen and she has to dress like a lady of old geese to be accepted, Hugh claiming to be the last descendant of the Fisher Queens, well, that could just be something similar. He could be somebody that came over the mountains. He could be a Great Empire of the Dawn person that is then just laying claim to the local floppy ears. George is giving us all of these options. We don't know which one it was, but we can see that there are multiple potential scenarios here which follow sort of the way the standard history flows. So concerning the peoples that were united by the Amazing One himself, Hugh a couple of things seem relevant. The Cymeri were supposedly, quote, the first people to work iron, although the Rhoynar also claimed this title. Azor Ahai was seemingly a smith, as he heated, hammered, and folded the steel of Lightbringer the sword, which implies that the Great Empire of the Dawn obviously had knowledge of metalworking. The Valyrians seemed to be heirs of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and of course they had advanced metalworking. The Great Empire of the Dawn had dragons, and they made fused stone, so they probably made Valyrian steel. And so here we have these Cymeri, who apparently have advanced metalworking knowledge. Perhaps that's a link to the Far East. And the Zokora, meanwhile, they have brown skin and pale hair, which is a very interesting combination. They were long of limb, and they had eyes that were something other than black, based on these descriptions. So venturing into the realm of the highly speculative, it's possible that tall with pale hair and medium brown skin is basically the look of the Gemstone Emperors, because we know that the Gemstone Emperors that Dany saw had Valyrian hair and eyes. The skin is not mentioned. All the people of the East tend to have darker skin, except for the Carthene and the Valyrians, like I was saying. And when you look over on Leng, we find something interesting. So check this out. The Dothraki and the Sarnori have identical coloring, like I said. Medium brown or bronze skin. They're both tall, both have black hair, and they have black eyes. Now, if you go over to Leng, the Lengi are an exact match, except for the eyes are golden instead of black. The Lengi are very tall, the tallest in the world. They're compared to the Sarnori because of their height. They have teak-colored skin, which is just another way of saying medium brown, golden, bronze, same wheelhouse of skin color there. And the Lengi are also, like I said, super tall. They also have black hair. So the only difference is the eye color. And that might be because the Lengi have interbred with the old ones. Point being, when we find these very tall people over in the grasslands, they match the Lengi, except for the eye color. So maybe, just maybe, and this whole episode is a whole lot of maybe here. We're just speculating. These very tall genetics and the medium skin tone and the black hair, they could all come from the East. And it could be a similar descendant as similar bloodline as the Lengi. So we've mentioned the similarities in eye, skin, and hair color and height between the Sarnori and the Dothraki. It's probably also worth mentioning that both cultures are very good with horses, just in different ways. The Sarnori have their deadly scythe chariots. That requires very advanced horsemanship, breeding, and training, and also very strong horses. And indeed, we're told they use specific breeds for specific purposes. Black mares for their cavalry, blood red horses trained to work in teams to pull the scythe chariots. So the Dothraki were nomadic, unlike Sarnor, which accounts for the different use of horses. But that may well have been a result of just the different ways that they lived. But if you separate the fact that one lives in cities and the other are nomadic, they're both identical looking horse lords. So it seems almost inevitable that there is a lot of transference of culture, knowledge, horse flesh, genetics. Even if they were potentially rivals, these are ancient related peoples. It's pretty obvious to me. So the Dothraki did not bring probably what I'm saying, I guess, here is the Dothraki did not bring the horses with them over the mountains. The horses seem to have been here on this side of the mountains, because over on the other side, we've only got the Zorses. And then you come over here and everybody knows how to ride horses, whether it's the Sarnori or the Dothraki. So you can see the picture here. Given the similar coloring and the similar horse culture, it's almost impossible not to conclude that the Sarnori and the Dothraki share a common ancestor, likely on the west side of the mountains. One culture became urbanized, whilst the other remained nomadic, but it's probably not a coincidence that we get two somewhat similar-looking horse people living right next to one another. So, just checking on these super chats here. Okay, very good. Oh, Brett Colmer. Okay, let me see if I can catch yours, buddy. Ah, there it is. Long Night is pre-Valyria. This is from Brett Colmer. So where does Dragonsteel get its name? Makes me question the timeline. Were there dragons during the Long Night? Yeah, so you need to check out, Brett, my Great Empire of the Dawn, Dragon Lords of Ancient Ashai video. I definitely think the Great Empire of the Dawn had dragons before the Long Night and before Valyria, and that they came to Westeros. And check out the Great Empire of the Dawn Westeros video, too. That's got the second half of the answer to your question. Basically, yes, the Great Empire of the Dawn came to Westeros. That's where the last hero's Dragonsteel comes from. It's probably Dawn. Dawn probably comes from the Great Empire of the Dawn. That's how that all lines up, in my opinion. But thank you for patiently calling my attention to your super chat, which I missed. I always appreciate it when you guys are patient with me. Can Dany be the moon that Dragonbinder will crack? Well, in a sense, I'm a little uncomfortable with the language there, but in the sense that I can see Euron trying to ensorcel Dany somehow. It's possible Dragonbinder could be used, but I think that Dany could actually use Dragonbinder and turn the tails on Euron. I think when it says no mortal man can sound it and live, like Dany might be an immortal woman, so she could she has the fire immunity. So potentially Dany could blow Dragonbinder and turn the tails on Euron. Euron's also a moon figure. His face is like a layering moon. He's got ice moon symbolism all over his face. So there's a couple things going on there. And don't forget, Dany can be Azor Ahai. She can be the comet and the dragon as well. So she might crack his moon face. Yeah, take that. And it is a bit Eowyn. Yeah, no man. I am no man. A little bit like that, yeah. And, Janeway, just a thank you super chat. Thank you, Janeway. And V-Star, I got that one. Cool, up to date. So the Sarnori men and women are said to have had the custom of making war together, with the women twice mentioned as the chariot drivers. Hugh Zoramai's Cimeri wife supposedly made his armor, which we are later told is in fact steel. So even though we have transitioned from female rulers, the Fisher Queens, to male rulers, the High King and Lesser Kings of Sarnor, we still see a remnant, some kind of gender equality and gender role flexibility. And again, this is kind of a broad concept, but there is a general shift, a general narrative shift from matriarchal societies to patriarchal ones throughout the whole history of the world of Ice and Fire. And I think that George is depicting this on an intentional level. And on a cosmic level, you could say that this all goes back to the murder of the moon goddess, right? Like, moons are usually looked at as goddesses. So when you kill the moon, it tracks very well with the Bloodstone Emperor murdering the Amethyst Empress. Anyways. So there's a nice bit of symmetry here with the beginning and end of the story of the Grasslands. The Fisher Queens, quote, ruled from a floating palace that made its way endlessly around its shores, while today, the Cowls drive their great herds of horses and goats endlessly around their sea, fighting one another when they meet and occasionally moving beyond the borders of their own lands for slaves and plunder. So we used to have wise and benevolent female rulers traveling in actual sea, and now we have traveling bands of violent male killers in a great grass sea, which again just sort of illustrates the shift towards patriarchy and violent conquest that we've seen over history. So lastly, concerning Sarnor, it should be noted, Pat Riley, what would happen if the horns were blown together? Well, it'd be a song of ice and fire, I guess. There's my shack face. All right. So lastly, concerning the Sarnori, it should be noted that they were some of the most accomplished seafarers and travelers in history. The Great Empire of the Dawn conquered Leng by sea, and if they reached Westeros, which we know they did, then it was surely a maritime power as well. So it's likely that they were simply because of the size and power of the Great Empire of the Dawn. So then check out the travels of the Sarnori. It says Sarnori traders traveled to Valeria and Yeti, to Leng and to Shai. Sarnori ships traveled the Shivering Sea to Ib and Far Mosavi. Sarnori kings warred against the Quathai and the old empire of Gis, and led many a foray against the bands of nomadic horsemen who roamed the steppes to their east. So that's pretty extensive travel. They seem to have an interest in lands formerly under the rule of the Great Empire of the Dawn, I have to notice. It's really too bad about the burning of the Great Library at Salash, City of Scholars. Or else I might not have to write this essay. The whole story would be there. But just to expand on that point, yeah, they really did make contact with a lot of the former Great Empire of the Dawn lands, Yeti, Leng, and Ashai. And that could be because, the early Sarnori would have retained a memory of whatever, connections they had to those places. And they would have been fellow former Great Empire of the Dawn survivors, if you will. So it's natural that they would establish some amount of trade. So to sort of sum up our findings here, a lot of people seem to have fled the collapse of the Great Empire of the Dawn by going west over the Bones Mountains. Thus, both genetics and culture from the various tribes of men that comprise the Great Empire of the Dawn spread all through Essos to Valeria and Karth, which is right around here. The people of the grasslands, such as the Sarnori and the Dothraki. So there you go. Like I said, we have to wonder about the Andals, because they arose in the grasslands around the Silver Sea, and there's all that starry wisdom kind of sounding stuff in the Faith of the Seven, but that is definitely for another day. So there you go. I will take last call for questions and super chats right now. Look, there's one from Sabrina, very interested in how dragons are viewed depending on historical location. European folklore sees dragons as negative, and Eastern Asian folklore dragons are seen as positive. Well, I've delved into that subject, Sabrina, in the Dany series, when I was pointing out that we shouldn't view Dany embracing her dragon nature as fundamentally evil and destructive, because a lot of the dragon mythology that George is drawing from comes from Eastern myth, from Vedic mythology, from Buddhist mythology, from Japanese and Chinese mythology. And all over the Eastern world, as you say, dragons are associated with enlightenment, higher awareness, divine inspiration, all kinds of things like that. So George is using that mythology all through Dany's arc, and when Dany embraces her inner dragon, it's usually to protect people and to increase justice in the world. And so. I do not know about the way that people look at dragons in different parts of A Song of Ice and Fire, but I know that the way that people look at dragons in different parts of the real world very much figures into George's concept of the dragon and what it means. Fire and blood, also, somebody's pointed out that fire and blood could be taken in a totally different way. Fire is like fire of the gods, the fire of creativity, the spark of life. And blood, well, blood, that could be bloodlines, like your blood, your family. So you have fire and blood. Like fire is what brought us in out of the cold. It's like the first bit of human advancement, the ability to keep warm. Think about when you think about fire and blood, think about all your blood and family sitting around the campfire as a community. So even those words can be taken in completely different ways. Right. Hearth and family, hearth and heart. We render up to you. The whole ice and fire oath of the reeds. Exactly. So well said, Jan. So yes, so that is how it figures in. The Dany's dragon identity and dragon nature is not purely destruction and death. Paladin Pony says, do you think the Great Empire of the Dawn made some of the dark creatures with blood magic, just like the experiments of old Valyria? Yes, and I recommend to you the live stream from about a month ago called Great Empire of the Dawn Dracomorph. And that one gets, it is very specific about how I think the blood of the dragon and all that stuff was created. And I'm also piggybacking off of the Crowfood's Daughter essays, which are about the blood of the dragon. So I highly recommend those as well. If one of my mods will drop that in the link. But of course, I think most of you guys are aware of the Disputed Lands channel and Amanda's cool videos. So. Here's a good one. When Dany gets to the Mother of Mountains, which symbols do you think will be featured? Fiery symbolism, pyres and stuff, or the Fisher Queen's mermaid symbolism? Well, we're gonna have probably all of the above. So when Dany goes to the womb of the world, let's talk about that. And also Ghostgrass from Maud Mary was asking me about that. So when Dany goes to the womb of the world in Game of Thrones, she's pregnant with baby Rhaego. She eats the horse heart, and then she goes bloody and naked into the womb of the world. Then there's a line about the moon floating above the lake, and it being mirrored on the surface of the lake. The moon's twin floats on the water, and then Dany's in the water, immersing herself in the lake, just as the reflection of the moon is immersed in the lake. So Dany very clearly is a moon going into the lake, coming back out reborn. So this is very much giving us, it's kind of like a union of the Dothraki legend of the first rider emerging from the womb of the world, only it's actually a mother goddess figure emerging from the womb of the world. And you could look at her son Rhaego as the first rider, essentially. So I think that when Dany goes back to the Mother of Mountains in the womb of the world, we'll get a redux of that. We'll get the fire and the water symbolism. We'll get both. And it's going to be an explosion of symbolism. I expect that to be one of the best symbolic scenes that George has ever written. Whatever sort of climax that Dany has with the crones of the Dush Khaleen, Again, and the crones of the Dush Kaleen in Dany's vision are emerging from the womb of the world as well, just like the first rider. So the womb of the world is this great rebirth symbol. It's a black lake, so it kind of represents the darkness of the cosmic womb tomb, which is a Kali idea. And that's all going to be, happening. And maybe Dany will go to the top of the mountain with Drogon. That seems likely. So yeah, that's going to be awesome. Now the ghost grass, there's a Dothraki prophecy that one day ghost grass will cover the world and all life will end. The thing is, the ghost grass is described like a combination of Dawn swords and the others. The ghost grass, they're tall stalks. They're taller than a man. So they're huge. They're 6 feet tall. They're like giant swords. They're blades of ghost grass. So they're like swords. They look like milk glass. So it's very strong Dawn milk glass blade imagery. And they glow, just like Dawn glows, with the light, the ghost light of the damned. So the ghost light of the damned makes us think about the others. Of course, the others in Dawn have all the same symbolism, pale swords. The others' bones look like milk glass. So when we see the ghost grass growing all around Ashai, and we have the idea of the Dothraki talking about ghost grass covering the world, there's several related ideas here. The ghost grass sounds like the others, and it sounds like Dawn. So when we have ghost grass covering the world and all life ending, that just sounds like a prophecy of the others covering the world and all life ending. That's pretty straightforward. The idea that ghost grass is found in Ashai and the Dothraki have a legend about it is another clue that the Dothraki culture has ties to ancient Ashai and the Great Empire of the Dawn. So there you go. I mean, it's a very strong clue of a cultural link there, that prophecy. And it's also interesting that George is giving us basically kind of a long night-ish prophecy with the Dothraki. And similarly, what's interesting is that there's a related prophecy of Rhaego, the stallion who mounts the world, of his Khalasar will wield shining blades in their hands and cover the earth, and everyone will submit to them, which makes them sound like the others, because the others wield the shining blades that look kind of like Dawn, and they cover the world and all life will end. So the Dothraki prophecy of like their chosen one conquering the world is actually a mirror to their prophecy of all life ending. And that is because, of course, Azor Ahai was a bad guy, and he created the others, like I've always said. And that's why we see the chosen one and the bringer of the others as actually being the same figure in their myth. And also, I would take the presence of ghost grass near Ashai as a clue that Dawn comes from Ashai, because the ghost grass, again, it's described exactly like the blade Dawn, it's glowing and they're blades of milk glass. I don't know what to say. It's like a field of Dawn swords, but they're plants somehow. So guys, I'm getting ready to wrap this up. And if you have any final questions that you would like to get in, now's the time. Do you think Dawn is pale because they used sea dragon bone for it? Well, sea dragon bones are weirwood. So I don't know if you're asking me if I think weirwood is involved in Dawn. It could be. There is a theory about that, because weirwood turns into pale stone when it petrifies. Dawn was made from a pale stone. So maybe you grind up weirwood stone and that's like part of the ingredients or something. But I tend to think if there's a weirwood component to the sword forging, that it's be a magical component. The thing is that we do know that, okay, the last hero had a sword. It breaks against the others, right? Then he receives help from the children of the forest. And then he emerges on the other side wielding the Dragonsteel sword and leading the Night's Watch. So it sort of could be inferred that the children of the forest helped the last hero reforge his sword, or they pulled a sword out of their trunk. They're like, yeah, we got this from the Great Empire of the Dawn a long time ago, traded them some mushrooms and shit. And, maybe you could use it. Or maybe it was reforged. I do like the idea that there was a sword reforging during the Long Night at Winterfell. Because the first time we see a Valyrian steel sword, the first time we see Ned Stark, the first time we see a Stark sword called Ice, what is Ned doing? He's washing off his sword in the Black Pond. Essentially, he's dipping his sword in the pond and pulling it out clean. And so there's an echo of the Lady of the Lake, giving Arthur Excalibur, the sword that comes from the lake. And if you think about the tempering process, when you temper a sword, you plunge it into cold water, right? Well, Ned has this bloody Valyrian steel fire sword, and the first thing we see him do is essentially plunging it into the cold water of this lake, almost as if he's reenacting someone tempering a magical sword in the frozen pond at Winterfell's Godswood. So, if the last hero broke his sword and is journeying in the cold, frozen, dead lands, at the time of the Long Night, the entire North might have been the cold, dead lands. And it could be that if Dawn was reforged with the Children of the Forest help, that it would have happened at Winterfell in the Godswood Pond. Because, like I said, there are symbolic precedents for that, which is pretty good tinfoil there. And yes, dipping his sword in the Lady Pond. Yeah, you guys, Lightbringer's all about dicks. We all know that. We all know that. Dick jokes are always fair game. Do you think the others could have been a tribe of first men? Not exactly. I think the others were the spirits of the weirwood trees, or they were green men, which is kind of the same thing, really. I think the original green men were something like dryads, your classic elf spirits that are very much tied to the trees, avatars of the trees, guardians of the trees. And I think the Azor Ahai, essentially his original sin was to invade the weirwood net, and the others were created as a sort of fallout of that. So I think that the first men do descend from green men a little bit. That's why, and I mentioned this in my timeline stream, but when you look at Garth the Green, and you look at the Sacred Order of the Green Men, they have the same description. They're basically Cernunnos. They're green-skinned, antlers, all that. They ride elks, they're green seers, stuff like that. So in the Reach, they believe that all the original great houses descend from Garth the Green. Well, Garth the Green is less likely to be one person and a lot more likely to be a conglomerate memory of the Green Men. So if that's true, the idea that all the people from the Reach and a lot of the first men descend from Garth the Green is really just saying that a lot of the first men descend from green men. And that's logical, because if the first men interbred with giants and children of the forest, which we know happened, they probably also interbred with the green men, whatever the green men are. And so there you go. In a sense, the others are a tribe of first men in that they're green men. But yeah, there you go. That's as much as I can say on that. Hope that didn't sound too tinfoily. I'm referring to deep ideas sort of like very quickly, all at a stroke. Yeah. Wow, 307 viewers. They keep going up. I was going to end the stream, but there's more people here than ever before. I guess I'll go a few more minutes and take a few more questions. Paladin Pony asks if I think the green men are like druids. Essentially, yes. They're like Cernunnos druids, something like that. Although at this point, the green men that are on the Isle of Faces, they could be undead. It could be green as in like zombies. Hey, Alyssa. Elisa? Man, I always do that. I know it's Elisa. Thanks for coming. You've been working so much lately. Been missing you at all these streams. Oh yes, we'll go to 5:20. There you go. Be 4:20 Central Time. Yeah, Central Time. That's it. Crimson Templar says, "I sent you money. Keep going." Well, okay, that's fair enough. Let me just check. Oh yes, I did. Thank you. I got a couple PayPals. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Again, with the PayPals come under your actual true name, and I never know if people want their names on the internet. So I will say first name. Thank you, June. And Gabrielle. And Curtis. There you go. And they come in late, too. So there may have been more people that sent that I'm not quite seeing yet, too. Are the Danes and the Carthian related? Well, tangentially, I mean, if I'm right that the Carthian, their tall, pale looks come from the Great Empire of the Dawn. I mean, obviously the Danes are white as white can be. They're not the darker Dornish. They're like the white, blonde Dornish, the very fair Dornish. And the Valyrians, obviously pale hair and skin. So, yeah, I mean, loosely speaking, that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm saying the Danes, the Valyrians, and the Carthian may have all come from a similar Great Empire of the Dawn ancestor. Because the Great Empire of the Dawn being a multi-ethnic empire, you know, we can see that most of the people in that empire were not fair-skinned. They were the Yeti and the Jogos Nhai, and the Ashai itself are described as being dark. So, yeah, the white people in the Great Empire of the Dawn seem to have been the Carthene and the ancestors of the Valerians and House Dane. Yeah. Elisa is tuning in from the Starbucks line. Thanks. That's dedication. I appreciate that. I am blazing a trail this week. If you don't catch all these live, if you're catching them all on the replay, thank you very much. And yeah, what's really nice is when people watch the replay and then make a PayPal donation like days after the live stream, and I just see it drop into my email. That's like the best thing ever, I must say. I see the children as fairies, the others as snow elves, the green men as druids. Yeah, sure. Yes, if you want to look at it like that, yes. Of course, I mentioned all the time Quinn's video about the White Walkers being icy she and being related to the children of the forest. Martin is very much contextualizing them in that language. They are nature spirits. They're just frozen nature spirits. So that's how we should think about them. Thank you, Ryan. Like I said, definitely, if you're interested in my political commentary, you can follow me at the Dragon LML. Plenty of it there. And if you want pictures of my birds, follow me on Instagram. That's also Lucifer Means Lightbringer on IG. That's where you find the bird pictures. Garth is good. Here we are, 4:20 Central Time. So guys, thank you very much. Good 2-hour live stream. Lots of attendance. Please leave a comment on your way out. That really helps the video just as much as the like, maybe even more. So whatever your favorite thing was from the stream, leave a comment. If I missed your comment or question, chat it in there. Basically anything that you can put in the comments, generate a little conversation, does me a solid. It's something you can do. It doesn't cost any money to help. And there's lots of fun people to talk to here in the comments of my videos. So it's one of the safer places on the internet, I would say. Thank you all. Been a lovely audience. Oh, Atlantis book update. Well, there's no Atlantis book yet. The first book I'm going to write is going to be that Lucifer Means Lightbringer book. That's about the reverse Garden of Eden, the importance of symbolic myth, integrating your sort of broken religious upbringing to the modern life and trying to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be my first book. That's going to be nice and short. And I've already talked about a lot of those ideas on various streams. I am going to make an Atlantis, pseudo-Atlantis fantasy novel, but that's far in the future, guys. So yeah, that's not imminent. that's in the brainstorming phase. So thanks for all your support, guys. And once again, thank you everyone who supported Quinn's Tadia campaign. It's awesome to see Quinn's super fired up about it. And as a YouTuber who wants to eventually write a book and is curious to see if your YouTube crowd will follow you over and support you in your other creative endeavors, it's been very encouraging to see all the support for Quinn and for Tadia. And it just looks awesome now that we're seeing all the art come in. So if you haven't checked that out and you've just been hearing me mention that, go check out Tadia and pre-order. You can become a supporter. All right, guys. Oh, Paladin Pony. Yep, that's another one of my favorite questions. Get me on the way out. Will Darkstar join up with Young Griff? Absolutely. Darkstar will be fake Arthur Dane to Young Griff's fake Rhaegar's son. And it will be fake Nirvana. And then somebody will kill his ass and take Dawn and give it to John or Danny so they can use it in a worthy fashion. And there is the Tadia Indiegogo link in the chat. Thank you, Pat Riley. Elisa says, I just got grad money so I can buy it. Right on. Right on. Yes, the chat was amazing today. Thank you, Mod. Thanks for all the great questions. Thanks for the great comments. And I will see you again next time. Maybe with a midweek stream, definitely with something by next week. Oh, and I'll have a video about the others and the Kingsguard symbolism coming out in the next week too. See you later, guys. Thanks a lot. Beep boop.